Howdy, how was your vacation? Where'd you go? What'd you do there? What part of the state? Where were you from? Where were you from? Denver. Someday I want to ask you about your vote thing over here.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
Our last little power up we had. Seems to be a little interesting. Using them things now?
Oh, we do video on here to get people to read.
So we had about 3 of them on the call
Uh-huh.
on a second, and Jared says, pick your which one you think.
We have a number of people on call.
No. We had a motion.
Yeah.
Motion was made. The second on the motion was 3 of us all at the same time.
Oh, okay.
I thought, yeah, how do you distinguish which one you actually was leading the one that made the motion
So
on the second? But that was not used. It was just, it was both.
So then it would be the chair.
Once I turned around and mentioned this to Jennifer the other day, she's pretty busy. And I didn't know if Jared could actually see that or not. By doing that, I thought that might be a better way to take care of that issue.
Yeah.
Instead of us just screaming.
Have to talk to
Since it's
Jennifer
been
about.
working when I was on the council, I don't know how it worked yet today with Joe here and that.
Yeah. The voting software can be used by the planning commission, but it would be.
Yeah, which we do use the vote, but not on the motions.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's what I thought I would like to be able to do, because if you turn around, speak.
Yeah.
Be recognized, then you turn around, then you can
Yeah.
do your, and that, so it's not so chaotic, as I
Well,
thought.
It's one of those things that the chair would recognize whoever.
That's my point.
Yeah, and so.
I don't know if Jared could learn this or not. That was my thought.
Mhm.
I mentioned this to Jennifer the other day.
I mean, for that type of board, it would be up to, some boards like to be more casual. This would, make it more
I know,
regimented in
but-
terms of people not speaking over each
But
other.
the thing was, but yeah, this way, because like I said, we had that and we had 3 of us out of the 8 of us here.
Yeah,
And it's like, well, now which one said it? And it
yeah,
was all at the same time. That was
Yeah.
my, in that regard.
yeah. I don't know. Just have to,
Just my thought.
where I was in Kansas, it just depends upon how well the board gets along too. You know what I'm saying? If they don't get along well, then you've got to,
Chaos.
I want to make my motion before he makes his motion because of whatever. But if you're all,
I just read it this way because I know I brought this up here before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Then we went to the other issue there, back to vocal,
Yeah.
and then now we're back to using this for a vote.
Yeah. It's here. You want to talk to Jennifer and the chairman about that. Yeah. I mean,
Well, I mentioned Jennifer.
but we're talking about using other stuff, other software.
How's your other program coming along?
Well, they're still working on it. It's gonna come down to equipment and availability, you know.
You just still move
Getting-
forward with it?
Yeah, it's still moving, but they're like, it'll probably be 2023 because of the availability of hardware. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little extra. Well, they've got, there's,
Yeah, that's cool.
that's okay. I'll just put you down. Well, the Carl's not gonna be here.
You're just so valid.
Yeah, it's gonna get some close here.
Hey, how's it going?
Are you?
Good, good.
People signing the other day?
Yeah, I did pretty well. Saturday, at,
I spotted you.
out for the house, yeah, I got,
Hi.
filled 4 pages on Saturday,
Well, that's not bad.
4 on each, so it's,
Well, that's probably worth it. Yeah.
well, that's kind of a good, you know, that's kind of the main drag out to lakes this time of year.
That's
It's,
what I figured while you were there. And then my buddy was riding with me, I was out giving a tour.
yeah, I did real good there, like 2020.
I spotted you there, what's going on?
They said, hey, but it'll be in, on the July thing. A chance. Not sure. All right.
We have seen assignment yet, or is that what you're working on right now?
Yeah.
You see,
I guess you're sitting here.
Everybody, how you doing?
We're all sitting over there.
How was your health? So far today, I made it. I'm good.
Jensen. So,
Been a while. No.
you're over there?
I don't know where, I was just looking for my dad. I'm not picky, I'll just somewhere we put it.
I just drop them around and try to mix it up a little bit, so.
I'll go sit down at 505 if that's all right.
And
Moving the meeting to 5:05.
pick your place.
I vote yes.
I'll make that a motion if that's all right.
Executive decision right there. Sit right here.
Oh, we were really getting to go. Hey.
Get in there.
I don't know.
So you guys are ahead of me. We'll put Jared over here. But
Wait till the heat comes out tomorrow. My so dry right now, you can't keep it wet.
Yeah, James, I had an older couple up at the courthouse the other day. They stopped,
7 minutes early.
they stopped at a specific sign. They said, "No, you should come out to the Friendship Center out there Wednesday. Come out there, there's a lot of people who like the sunshine, don't have mobility stuff." I called down there, I wasn't gonna just show up, I called down there, she checked with somebody here from the city and somebody else. No, it was too much close and stuff, they didn't want it out there. I said, I'm just not cold calling, there were people that told me that I should come out there, so. But apparently not.
Oh,
More the merrier.
yeah, oh.
I was just like,
I'm in.
check.
I'm in. Yeah.
Nothing. It was just a development.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
Just Don't just drive quite that much. Oh, where?
Yeah, I'm definitely proud of him. He worked hard, no doubt. He's really working on his game. It paid off. Yeah, that's a lot of golf holes to play, 140 to get all the way through the end. Yeah. That's how. That's exactly how he is. He wants it. He just wants to play for the love of it. So. Yeah. guess so.
How are you this evening?
Yeah. Definitely off.
I have a pen here. I need one.
All right, it's 5:30. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll open up the special joint city council and planning commission meeting. Call to order. Time is 5:30. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. Tyler, if you want to start with roll call of the city council.
Gibson. Ellis.
Yeah.
Ganem.
Present.
Yerger.
Yes.
Jensen.
Here.
Sukram.
Yes.
Legband.
Here.
Vaughn.
Here.
7 council members are present, Mayor.
The planning commission.
Wilson. Carlson. Four Eyes.
Here.
Warsaw. Lathrop. Here. Yeager. Boyer.
Here.
Lampole.
Here.
4 members of the planning commission are present.
Okay, our item on the agenda tonight is an overview of sign and development standards proposed by House Sale Levine. We have Jackie here, who's been working on our UDC update for the comprehensive plan, and she's here to speak and give an overview. So the floor is yours.
Rich. This evening we're here on articles 6 and 7 of the draft UDC. These are drafts to present to you all. We're going to give a high-level overview of the real structure, the proposed framework for these articles. I'm hoping that'll give you some guidance as you do a more detailed review of the actual proposed text. We present several questions and blue boxes throughout the presentation. We're hoping that you'll consider these as you're doing your more close review. I won't stop and ask for your feedback during this meeting since we do have limited time, just an hour with you all. But if I'm going through something and you want to provide feedback, you have a question, please feel free to stop me, to let me know, and we can pause and discuss. All right, so you all are probably very familiar with this proposed UDC structure at this point, but today we are going through really the heart of the UDC, the general development standards and the sign standards. So starting with the general development standards, what's posted here is the proposed outline of the article. So you'll see it covers many topics. So all of the topics that would be pertinent to development, regardless of the district in which it will be located. So the ones that just popped up in bold are the ones I'll be going into a little bit more detail on. These are the areas where we're proposing some more major changes. And the landscape and screening standards, those are highlighted in blue because I'm going to present them a little bit out of order based on an overview I'd like to give before going into these standards on the tiered approach that we're proposing to take with these standards, where we're looking at different areas of your community differently, proposing different standards for, say, your downtown or your gateway areas versus your industrial corridors. So starting with your off-street parking and loading requirements. So currently the amount of parking that's required is measured based on a parking floor area. So this can be a pretty confusing calculation. It's not super clear what is and is not included in that calculation. So we are proposing to replace that with a net floor area calculation and then have a list of what would not be included. So it would be things like storage areas, walk-in coolers or refrigerators, areas where it really doesn't generate customers, it doesn't generate employees, it's kind of extra space where parking would not be necessary to accommodate people that would be using those areas. We are also proposing to update the minimum amount of parking required for each use. So the table itself has been updated so that it aligns very closely with the proposed use table. And then overall, we're proposing to require less parking than you do currently for many uses. A lot of what we heard through feedback was there's just way too much parking. Lots of things are over parked, and it makes it difficult to have outlots and other types of infill development in your commercial corridors. So looking at reducing that overall amount of required parking. We are also proposing a maximum, so a maximum allowance, a cap on the amount of parking that can be allowed in the community. So we're proposing that to be 50% more than the minimum requirement. But that can be waived. So recognizing that there are uses that may require more parking than others. So let's say a Chick-fil-A is going to need more parking than another type of fast food just based on its popularity. So based on that parking demand study, the zoning administrator can say you can provide more parking than what that maximum would allow you to. On the other hand, if the parking demand study really doesn't show that they need the additional parking, but they would like to have it to accommodate what they think is their need, then that additional parking, if it's surfaced in a pervious material, they would be allowed to install. We are also proposing a new section in your parking and loading section about reserved parking spaces. So curbside pickup is a trend that happened during COVID that really seems like it's sticking around. So allowing up to 10% of required parking to be reserved for that curbside pickup. Of course, those spots would need to have signs related to that reservation, but allowing that up to 10% of required parking. Then for the electric vehicle charging stations, we're proposing that the infrastructure required to accommodate an electric vehicle charging station be installed for every 50 parking spaces. So
would there be a minimum of one if you don't require 50 spaces? I mean,
that is not how it's drafted currently, but we could certainly revise the language to do that in certain circumstances. I know especially in multifamily developments, even if there's not 50 parking spaces, a number of electric vehicle charging stations are often required, since those folks don't have a garage back home that they can charge their cars in. It would just be that parking lot for them. That's definitely something we can look into. But we are proposing not the charging stations themselves be installed, just the infrastructure required to support that. So if the property owner doesn't want to install the charging stations, they don't need to. But if in the future, if demand really increases and they want to install them, they don't have to rip out their whole parking lot to put in the infrastructure to accommodate those. We are also proposing some tweaks to your dimensional requirements for your parking spaces. So currently the requirements for your parking stalls are quite large. We are not proposing that they go, that they be reduced all the way down to what is typical and as determined by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, just recognizing that many vehicles, many people in Fremont drive larger vehicles, so more trucks, more SUVs. So we don't want to have a circumstance where a parking lot can't accommodate those and makes it tricky to drive in. So
Interesting, because I drive a small compact car. Some people have a big pickup, let's say, that actually is a crew cab, and I find those take up a lot more room in that slot than it does my little car. And so to try to sandwich between those spots, is that applicable enough to get your widths in there for that?
yes,
Yeah, I kind of question that.
So these aisle widths, these space widths would accommodate those. Some communities, though, that do have the larger vehicles require not just the single stripe between parking spaces, but the U stripe. And that adds about a additional foot between each space to accommodate those doors. So that's definitely something that Fremont could consider if those issues are really pertinent.
That's what I see, you know, when I park anyway, and I don't know if other people run into that or not, but they turn around and try to be part of the senior citizen to get in and out of the vehicle can be challenging. Some of the parking lots is the thing.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are also proposing that compact parking spaces be allowed. So these would be, of course, a certain percentage of the overall required parking could be set aside for more compact vehicles. So those standards for the width and the depth of those spaces would be less than your standard parking stall. So in addition to the changes to the parking stall dimensions and the minimum parking requirements, we are proposing that cross access between parking lots on adjacent parcels be required. So this would mean that if you're going from one business to another, you don't have to pull out onto the street and then turn right back into the next driveway or next curb cut. You're able to access that from parking lot to parking lot. So because there are often circumstances where that may not be feasible, may not be desirable, we're proposing that the zoning administrator have the ability to waive or modify that requirement under certain circumstances. Pedestrian circulation systems are another proposed requirement for parking lots. So this would require walkways to connect all the buildings on the site to one another, buildings to your parking areas, building entrances to public rights of way, and adjacent properties along a shared frontage. So this recommendation is coming out of a lot of what we heard through the community outreach process for both the UDC and the comprehensive plan, that folks wanted the ability to more safely walk along your commercial corridors to different businesses in town. So surfacing. So currently unsurfaced parking lots are allowed in the general industrial district if they are located to the interior side or rear of the building. So one of the questions we're hoping you all consider as you're doing your closer review of the text is, should the city continue to allow unsurfaced parking lots in Fremont? We posed the same question to the steering committee earlier today, and they felt as if, yes, where they are allowed, currently they should continue to be allowed. They were appropriate in those general industrial areas, were a benefit to businesses, that they didn't have to invest overly in those parking areas when it wasn't didn't seem to be necessary. All right, so moving into driveways, we have some proposed new standards for single-family detached, duplex, and row home driveways. So the first one is a limit of one driveway per 75 feet of lot frontage. So this would still allow that U-shaped type of driveway if you had a much larger lot frontage, but otherwise it would be pretty limiting to one driveway, one curb cut per lot. And then we're proposing some new standards for different portions of the driveway itself. So the first one would be that single slab driveway. That's the blue area on that diagram. So this would be the portion of the driveway that connects with the public right of way. Another option for that area would be a ribbon driveway. This would in no way be required. It would just be an option for property owners if they wanted to consider it. So this would be in those yellow portions that would be paved. The space between the ribbons could be a landscape, could be grass, something else to minimize that impervious surface on their lot. But again, a choice, just an option for residents, for homeowners to consider as they're replacing their driveway.
Same question. Could that be a conflict of our MS4, or is any tracking out that could come from that?
I'm sorry?
This is a MS4. It actually has to do with water sewer separation as far as any material that can come out of that driveway. If it's actually like an impervious cover. That's why we pave, I believe.
So this would actually help with stormwater absorption rather than runoff into your storm system.
But the thing is, if it's not actually ground cover, it could be just dirt and then you track out.
So that would be required to be covered in with ground cover, live ground cover.
But if it died,
You could say the same thing about the rest of your front yard though. So
You're not
the
supposed to
maintenance
drive on it.
requirements.
you're not supposed to drive on it.
So you wouldn't be, I guess that is fair. We can check with your
Yeah,
stormwater
that's
folks
what I'm
and
trying to
see if
figure out
that's going to be a violation. Certainly, we can
Okay.
check in on that. So the next area, this purple area, is the garage access drive. This would be an area that would go out to meet the full width of the garage itself. So we are proposing that the single slab or the ribbon driveways, that overall width be limited to 20 feet. We got feedback from the steering committee that 22 or 24 feet may make more sense. But then that would be about the width of a 2-car garage, where currently your standards are a 3-car garage the driveway can go all the way the width of that 3-car garage. We're proposing that that be lessened so that you have less area that could be a conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. So the kids riding their bikes or the mom walking with the stroller, they're not crossing that driveway for quite as long. So there are fewer opportunities for those conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians. But recognizing that 3-car garages are very common, 4-car garages are even becoming more common. We, of course, want to allow people adequate access to their garage. So that garage access drive would be the width of the garage, a couple feet on each side. It would just taper back to that 20 feet as you get closer to the right of way.
Jackie, question on that. Does that just mean as far as that width that's actually in my property line and not the right of way?
So this dashed line here, that is the property line. So it would be
Okay.
what's past that. What's going into the right of way itself would be the driveway apron, and that's more controlled by the Public Works Department, by the right of way standards, since that's
But
falling
their
into
standard today is 32 feet.
exactly. So we are proposing that that be revised.
Okay.
So I understand single slab driveways is meaning to reduce to 20, 22, 24, whatever that ends up being, as opposed to up to
32, right? So instead of it being a straight line here to the property line, it would taper back to that 20 feet, but you'd still be able to get as wide as you needed to access your garage. We are also proposing a new standard for parking pads. So this would be an additional parking area in the side yard next to the garage where you could park a boat, an RV, recreational equipment generally. So this would keep those recreational equipments from being parked in front of the house. It's more off to the side, a little less apparent, a little less obvious for neighbors. So we are proposing that that be something that's allowed, as long as, of course, they're able to meet their impervious maximums. So we are hoping that you consider whether the proposed driveway changes are appropriate for Fremont moving forward. So again, that change between the 32-foot driveway width at the property line to that change to 20 feet, or as the steering committee recommended, 22 or 24 feet.
Is that pretty standard throughout the whole area?
I am not sure if it is standard throughout the region here, but it's definitely standard for communities that we've worked in across the US to really try and standardize the width of driveways at the sidewalk to try and make things a little safer for people as they're walking in their neighborhood.
What if
Yes.
it's a duplex with the garages are side by side?
That is a great question. So that is something that we had talked about at the steering committee level. There was one home builder who talked about the difference between duplexes and single family attached. So what is that distinction to be made when it's a duplex, when it's two different lots versus when it's one? How do you control those driveway standards? So we definitely need to look into that a little bit more, ensure that there's the nuance in there, the flexibility needed for all of those circumstances. So moving into fences, so we are proposing new standards for single-family detached duplex and row home fences when they're in the external side yard or the street-facing side yard. So currently the standard is a fence with a maximum height of 4 feet. It has to be 50% opaque when it's in the front or the exterior side yard. And lots of folks want to have better use of their side yard as it's so closely attached to their rear yards and are hoping for more of a privacy fence. That's a variance request that's come to the city quite a few times. So we're proposing to maintain the requirement for a 4-foot 50% opaque fence in the exterior side yard if that fence is right up to the property line. But if they set the fence back about 10 feet and have some landscaping in between the fence and the property line, then they could put up that 6-foot privacy fence and have a better use of their side and rear yard.
Foot kind of chews into a lot of property for some people.
It certainly does. So some communities bring that down to 5 feet. 5 feet is about the minimum I would say is usable for if you're going to have that landscaping in between. Otherwise, you get a little, it's a little tight. But we could certainly look to reducing it to 5 feet if the sentiment is 10 feet, maybe a little too onerous, maybe taking away too much of that rear yard or side yard.
I'd like to see that.
All right, so before I get into the proposed standards for landscape screening and signs, I wanted to give a little overview of the tiered approach that we're proposing. So through outreach, through our conversations with you all in the steering committee, we heard that there are some areas of the community where we want to see higher standards than what the city has currently, and in others, we don't need to have that same very high standard. So we heard that gateways in the downtown should have the highest standards in the community. Your industrial areas should not be held to that same high standard. They should have lower standards. And then all the areas in between should find that happy medium, that happy middle. So based on that feedback, we developed this tiers of regulation map. So this dark color, we've heard it's purple and blue, depending on what you see. So that would be your gateway area. That would be your tier 1. So you see that's the downtown and your major gateways into the community. Your tier 3 would be your ag areas and your industrial areas. And tier 2 is the rest of the community and the portions of the community that don't fall into tier 1, but are visible from a major arterial or highway as defined in the long-range transportation plan. So we did hear from the steering committee that this gateway should be moved to this location based on the realignment of that roadway. So really focusing that gateway to this area, since folks will be.
That one there where the 30 mark is at, that's gonna close. Yeah, I think you're up another mile to the east. Right there.
Okay, we'll certainly check in on those.
That's the way I see their drawings on their draft anyway. I haven't seen anything updated, but I think that other road closes.
Okay, we can certainly look into that and make sure that
Yeah.
where we're putting that circle is where that gateway actually will be.
Are you duplicating it? The traffic coming from the west is already the next intersection.
You mean, is it redundant with this gateway here? Potentially. I think as the community builds out more in this area, this would become more of a true gateway into the community. And someone on the steering committee had mentioned that there is a ball field or a sports complex that folks would be going down 30 and go south at that intersection to access. And perhaps that would be a good location for a gateway since folks may not be running past this area here. But certainly would love to get your feedback on these areas, make sure that we've got them nailed down.
Area, a conflict with the airport.
So the airport has its own standards regarding.
There's still a zoning jurisdiction in that neighborhood there, what you can do. And elevations in that.
Certainly. So these standards would not supersede the airport overlay standards. Those would still come into play. They would not.
Complex, there might be an issue with lighting in there or something like that.
And I may have misquoted the steering committee's comment. It was something that already exists in this area.
Yeah, there's one west of that, but okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the tiered areas as they're identified? Gonna jump into the landscape standards. So currently there is a landscape ratio, a minimum amount of landscape that's required overall on the site, but doesn't give a lot of direction or intentional standards for where that landscape is located. So oftentimes it's located in areas that really doesn't benefit the aesthetics of the site overall, sort of tucked away, not really very useful. So we are proposing some more intentional standards for landscaping that utilize that tiered system. So your tier 1 areas, gateways in the downtown would have the highest standards, the highest requirements for landscaping, where your tier 3 areas, your industrial areas would have the lowest standards, lowest requirements for landscaping. So we're proposing these 4 landscape zones. Building foundation, that would be the portion of the building that fronts the public right-of-way. Parking lot perimeter zone, that is where the parking lot is adjacent to a public right-of-way. The interior parking area landscape zones, that would be interior to the parking lot itself. And then the green is the transition zone. That would be where one lot abuts another lot.
Any concerns about being able to landscape in the downtown area for new development?
That's, yes.
Concrete?
Certainly. So the building foundation landscape zone, if you have a 0 to 5 foot setback, you would not be required to install this landscaping. You'd be exempt. Also would be exempt any use that's regulated by the FDA. A lot of those food processing plants, they have restrictions on how much landscaping can be located at the base of buildings. So we have a written exemption for those uses so that they don't have to come in front of you all for a variance or have some type of relief from the code. And then for these other uses, the transition landscape zone, that would not be required in the downtown, and the parking area perimeter and interior would apply to parking lots when they do exist in the downtown, but the parking requirements in the downtown district would be very low or non-existent for ground floor uses. So the building foundation landscape zone, that's the landscaping that would be at the base of the building with, where the building faces the public right-of-way. So in our tier 1 areas, that's proposed to be 80% of the frontage of the building. That would go down to 60% in tier 2 and 40% in tier 1. We had discussions with the steering committee that perhaps 20% in the tier 3 area made more sense, so that it could be really clustered right at the entrances to buildings, make those building entrances more inviting, more aesthetic, while recognizing that the rest of the frontage it's an industrial building. It doesn't need to have that additional boost in appearance. Now for the parking area perimeter landscape zone, this is the area between the parking lot and the sidewalk. So in the tier 1 area, the requirement would be for landscaping and a fence or a wall. In the tier 2 area, you have the option of putting in the fence or the wall and have the base requirement for a number of shrubs. And then in the tier 3 area, you can again choose to put in the fence or wall. And if you do, you can lower your shrub requirement. So you would have less landscaping in that area if you put in the fence or wall. Otherwise, there would just be a base requirement for the shrubs in that area. The parking area interior landscape zone. So we are proposing 3 types of interior landscaping: end caps, which are shown in green, medians, which are yellow, and islands, which are blue. So this diagram would be representative of what we're proposing be required in your tier 1 area. So all 3 elements would be required. Then in your tier 2 areas, if your parking lot is located in front of your building, then you would need to do all 3 components. But if it was located to the side or the rear of your building, then you could choose to do either the medians or the islands, but still be required to do the end caps. And then in the tier 3 area, regardless of where your parking lot is located in relation to your building, you would be able to choose between the medians and the islands and definitely do the end caps. And
is there any requirement for shrubs or trees to be planted?
yes, so there would be a minimum landscaping requirement for each of those elements.
These regulations apply to city-owned property as well as privately held property?
Yes. So some of the discussion we had at the steering committee level is perhaps in the industrial district, interior parking lot landscaping may not be appropriate, maybe just the end caps, maybe nothing at all, depending on how internal to your industrial areas those parking lots are. So definitely something to consider. Yes, so it would be for new development or substantial redevelopment. So if 50% or more of the property were to be redeveloped, then they'd have to comply with these standards, just like any non-conforming use. No, not at this point. So if they were to knock down their building and rebuild, then yes, they would need to comply with the new standards. But no, we wouldn't go out and say, plant some trees in your parking lot.
In other words, what Mark's asking about is usage change of the actual complex then doesn't require that.
Change of use would not require that, no.
We had this in the past and I know it became an issue, so okay, that's good to hear.
All right, and then the transition landscape zones, this is the one landscape requirement that we are not proposing be based on a tiered system. Instead, we're proposing that it be based on uses and the use of the subject lot and the use of the adjacent lot. So there are 4 transition zones that are proposed. A would be the least amount of landscaping, that's what's represented in this top graphic. And then D would be the most amount of landscaping, the most separation between uses, and that's what's shown here in this bottom graphic. So let's say my property I'm developing as a commercial use, next door to me is another commercial use, then that transition area would be that lowest requirement, that type A. If I'm in industrial use and next door to me is a residential use, then that would be the highest requirement, that type D. So it's proposed to be based on the use type and not the zoning district, because there are circumstances where there are residential uses in non-residential districts or industrial uses that are adjacent to one another. So we want to ensure that those negative impacts are mitigated as much as possible. So moving into screening, for the first 2 items up here on the list, we are proposing tiered standards. So for grease traps, trash and recycling receptacles, we're proposing that in your tier 1 areas, the screening around the receptacle, that material would match the material of the building itself and have a landscape requirement. In your tier 2 areas, you'd have a lesser landscape requirement, and the material for the screening would not have to match the building, it just complement the building. And then in tier 3, no landscape required, just that complementary material to surround the receptacle. Then for our loading areas, truck parking areas and drive-throughs. So this is screening that would only be required if those things are next to residential uses. So that would be just an additional level of screening to ensure that there isn't a nuisance issue with loading areas, truck parking areas, or drive-throughs with residential. Ground and wall mounted mechanical units and roof mounted mechanical units. These are pretty basic requirements if those units are visible from the public right of way for screening of those items. Encouraging the roof mounted mechanical units to be, that screening to be integrated into the architecture of the building. So more of a parapet wall rather than a corral or something in the middle of the roof. And then for the ground and wall mounted mechanical units, so recognizing that these units need airflow, they can't be completely enclosed within, a masonry wall. They would be a maximum opacity that could be allowed for that type of screening. Any questions on Article 6 before we jump into Article 7? All right. So for Article 7, we heard a lot of feedback through our outreach process that it was a very difficult, that your current science standards are difficult to navigate, difficult to understand what you can and cannot do, what's allowed, what isn't. So we're proposing a complete overhaul of your science standards to make them a bit more user-friendly and to right-size your sign sizes and have them be more proportional to the buildings and the lots on which they're located. So the items that are in bold on the list here are the ones that we're going to go through in a bit more detail with you all tonight, but definitely hope to get your feedback on all of these sections moving forward. So limit on sign and sign copy area. So we're proposing that each property be allowed 1 square foot of sign or sign copy area per lineal foot of lot frontage. So in this example for lot A, this lot is 100 feet wide, so they would get 100 square feet of aggregate sign area, which they could then divide up between a wall sign and a monument sign, a wall sign and a projecting sign and a pole sign, whatever they choose, however they want to spend that sign allowance, they would be able to do so. But that would be an overall amount of sign area they would be allowed that they could then work within. Similarly, with the temporary signs, you'd have that overall amount of sign allowance that you then have to work within for your temporary signs. We are proposing some changes on how to measure a sign copy area and sign area. So sign copy area, that would be applicable to wall signs, other types of signage where you either don't have a backing or the building is the backing. So the way that you would measure those is with the smallest geometry that can surround either the sign copy or the sign backing. And then for sign area, when that term is utilized, that's proposed to both capture the sign copy area and the sign base. So that would apply to monument signs. That helps to ensure that the sign copy area and the sign base are proportional with one another. You don't have a humongous sign base and a tiny little sign put on top of it because someone's trying to take advantage of the sign allowances. So in Article 7, we have this permitted and allowed sign types by district table. So this summarizes, it's a quick glance of what types of signs are allowed in what districts. So these are the permanent signs. So the filled black circle, that means that that is a sign that is allowed in that district, but requires a permit. And then you'll notice on the temporary signs portion of the table, there are some circles that are not filled in. So those would be sign types that are allowed without a permit. So they wouldn't have to come in and see Jennifer and get that sign permit, but all of the other sign types would. So I know I went through that pretty quick, so I'll jump back to the permanent signs so you can take a look at that. And then jump ahead to the temporary signs. Any questions on the types of signs that are allowed, how they're proposed to be permitted in each district?
What's a feather sign?
So a feather sign, I guess the best way to describe them is you'd have a base where a pole would come out of it and the sign would kind of like a teardrop down from the base. You see them a lot at
Right away thing.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
This is new term to me too.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so temporary signs, they're a pretty affordable temporary sign type that can be reused pretty often or pretty regularly. So like a wall mounted or ground mounted banner sign, that's kind of a one-time use type of sign, whereas feather signs are much more reusable. They can get more bang for their buck by investing in a feather sign. So we have general sign standards for sign materials. So the actual materials of the sign base or the sign copy. So in our tier 1 areas, we're proposing that high quality sign base and sign copy materials be utilized, and the materials list is delineated in the code itself. In the tier 2 areas, we're proposing that either a sign base be a high quality material or the sign copy be a high quality material, and then they could do the lower quality for the other. And then in the tier 3 areas, they would be allowed to use the lower quality materials for all of the sign components.
You're going to find low quality as how? Is it
Right, yes, so the list of what would qualify as a high quality material, what would qualify as a base quality material is listed out. So please, as you're going through the sign ordinance, if you're like, that should be a low quality material, you know, we're missing these types of materials, please let me know. We definitely want to get that list right.
Is that something that we should really be discussing high quality, low quality. I feel like the architects that are designing the building a lot better understand what their customer or homeowner or business person, like that, just like low quality, high quality.
So the
I don't get that we're- should be part of it.
certainly. So this is meant to set up a base standard, a base requirement, but we definitely want to build in flexibility in the code for those circumstances where we want to encourage creativity for maybe materials or the use of materials in a way that we
When
couldn't
you say
foresee.
material, what do you mean by material?
So the actual, so for
Like
instance,
vinyl on a sign? Or
so like a cabinet sign, versus a individually affixed letter sign for a wall sign. So instead of having the cabinet that you switch out that plate when the uses change, it's the raceway letters or the individually affixed letters that would be considered high quality versus the cabinet signs, which would be considered a lower quality.
I was just curious why we would allow a high quality top to be on a low quality base. Seems a bit counterintuitive.
So the idea in the tier 2 area is to have that sort of middle ground. So we're not requiring that the whole thing be made of the high quality materials, that you can maybe have if it's a monument sign, it's a masonry base, and then you have that cabinet sign front, so you can switch out those tenants as things switch over. So you're able to have that flexibility, that mix. But to your point, having that flexibility, we are proposing that a comprehensive sign plan process be included. So that would be sort of like a plan development process, but just for your sign package. So that's very useful if there's like a hospital or a campus where they need lots of signs that may not be considered as a part of the sign ordinance, or if it's a multi-tenant shopping center. A great point was made by one of the steering committee members that, you have the Holiday Inn Express, you have some other uses that are set back and they have their signs right at the property line, but those would be considered off-premises signs based on how your code defines them, which would then be prohibited. So through that comprehensive sign plan, you'd have that more flexible process where those things could be allowed or be approved.
Jennifer, do you have any input on all that?
I think we're certainly gonna have a lot of discussion on frontage sizes, locations, and quality in general. A lot of communities are going to higher quality sign requirements, particularly in high visibility areas. So I mean, really, it comes down to what Fremont wants, but it's not a requirement to have that series.
Like the Village Inn is redoing everything modern, so they're gonna have to follow. They'll want higher quality for their signage, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they are.
So,
But it all depends on, moving forward with this, what tier you're in and where those pole signs would be allowed versus not inside. If you go down 23rd Street today, there's a lot of really big signage, and to me, it's sensory overload, and I don't see the signs because there's so many of them, it's kind of cluttered. I think the intent of this is to try and bring it down, but still have visible signage, it's a point for advertising.
Yeah, so all of the standards that are being proposed are our interpretation of the feedback that we've received. So we definitely want to right size them, make that list correct for Fremont. If a tiered system for sign materials isn't appropriate for the community, we definitely want to hear that from you all, so we can get that either out of the code or get that list adjusted so it's more reflective of Fremont.
Does this approach basically eliminate the higher pole signs and other kinds of things that we're currently using as they replace? We'd have to migrate to this, which might be more aesthetically pleasing, but less visible from a distance of people that are going through town versus that are regulars. Is all of the signage going to be of this type going forward?
So we are
going on the 23rd Street corridor, for example. It's not this.
So pole signs are proposed to be allowed in your tier 2 and your tier 3 areas in the general commercial and the flex commercial districts currently. So that would be 23rd Street, Bell Street,
Like to
those.
keep what they have, or
So-
something very similar.
Yes, so they could put in a new pole sign if desired, or replace an existing pole sign if they have one in those more limited areas. We are though proposing to allow for larger monument signs than pole signs as a way of incentivizing that higher quality sign type.
That included the signs that they would put up off their own property that might be closer to the highway for some of the businesses that are set back, like some of the hotels.
So
Can
the.
they erect under this new code
So
off premise?
that was a discussion that we had with the steering committee. And the idea that came out of that discussion was that off-premises signs would continue to be listed as prohibited, but with the note that they could be approved as a part of a comprehensive sign plan to address exactly those circumstances where there's a business that's very far set back and wants to have a sign at the right of way, but have sold their outlots to other uses and no longer own that property.
So I'll clarify that just a little bit. It's not any off-premise sign that was discussed for that sign plan. It was more in the context of St. Bernard's, who has that large area of property. They put their sign up and then created outlots, so it's now an off-premise sign. And would it be allowed in the code? Well, if you have some sort of development sign plan, we can accommodate that, but not other off-premise signs. And we'll get to billboards.
So the next topic we wanted to talk with you all about was electrically activated changeable copy message centers. So currently your code allows for 25% of a pole sign, a monument sign, or a marquee sign to be an electrically activated changeable copy message center. So we are proposing to allow that type of center only on monument signs as a way to incentivize that higher quality sign type. We are also proposing to increase that maximum percent of sign area based on the tier that you're located in. So tier 1, that would remain at the current standard of 25%. Tier 2 would go to 30%. Tier 3 would go to 35%. We had lots of discussion with the steering committee on this topic, and they felt as if those numbers should be increased even more. So maybe 30, 40, and 50% rather than 25, 30, 35. And one steering committee member I thought had a great idea of allowing the electrically activated changeable copy message center to be larger if you have a smaller sign than if you have a much larger sign, as he was concerned that if we make it just a percent of your overall sign area, then that would encourage people to max out their signs as much as possible in order to have that larger electrically activated changeable copy message center. So those are both, I think, good ideas that we can explore integrating into the code. Please.
So in that regard, that electric sign in there, is there anything about the type of brightness of the sign itself, daytime, nighttime?
Certainly. So the standards that are currently in the code for illumination, for dimming based on the lighting outdoors, for the duration of the message before it transitions to the next one, all of those standards are proposed to be kept in.
Thank you.
Curious as to why we wouldn't allow any of the electronic signs on the buildings themselves as opposed to.
That's a great question, and that's definitely something that would be more of a policy approach for the city. You currently only allow them on freestanding signs and marquee signs. Most communities only allow them as a part of freestanding signage. The ones on buildings themselves, more like wall signs, that's much less common. But if that's the direction the city wants to move into, we can definitely explore standards for that. So one thing we would request that you all consider as you're reviewing the sign standards draft is whether a manual changeable copy message center, regardless of the sign with which it is associated. So maybe it's a pole sign or a wall sign even, should that be allowed to be replaced with an electrically activated changeable copy message center?
For example, the sign out front, you know, where you have the manual letters, you know, change, public one or whatever, should that be allowed to be
Just change that inside, you wouldn't have to go out there to do the message then with that, is that correct?
Right, yeah, that's how this works, is that you do the program, the electronic sign center, so, you know, I'm using the city as an example of that type of sign, but, you know, it would apply equally to other locations. Or, you know, is that something that we as Fremont think is here in town, and then if so, how much that sign area?
Times Square, yeah. Yeah.
The Eternal statue can have a little more fair fight with Dairy Queen, then they both have their.
All right, and then the final topic that we wanted to discuss with you all were prohibited signs and content, more specifically billboards and off-premises signs. So currently, those sign types are considered prohibited, and so all of the ones that are existing now are considered legally non-conforming. So if for some reason they were to go away, they could not be replaced. So the city has received, and I'm sure you all are very aware, requests for new billboards for off-premises signs and for the replacement of existing billboards and off-premises signs. So there was some concern at the staff level that the prohibition on these sign types didn't get the discussion that it needed during the last UDC update. So we wanted to bring it back up, have the conversation again to see if these are sign types you wanted to continue to prohibit. So I will say we had the same conversation with the steering committee, and it seemed like they felt as if billboards and off-premises signs should continue to be prohibited, with that exception for off-premises signs if they are approved as a part of a comprehensive sign plan. So all of these little red dots, those are the general location of existing billboards throughout the community. So you can see they're really dispersed throughout the city and really concentrated on what was formerly more major highways or bypasses through town. So one of the reasons that a steering committee member thought we should continue to ban billboards is that if, for say, they were allowed along 30 or other major highways in the community, then the community is just going to build out around those areas, and then we'll have the same issue as Bell Street and 23rd, where they may not be appropriate any longer based on future development, future growth of Fremont. So we did some research into Omaha and Columbus, took a look at how they are approaching billboards. So both of these communities do not allow new traditional or static billboards, but they do allow for the installation of new electrically activated CCMC billboards if two existing traditional billboards or static billboards are removed. So it's sort of a 2-for-1 or a 1-for-2 type of deal. You can put up this new billboard if you take away two existing ones. And they limit the location of these new billboards to specific zoning districts, and then in specific portions of those districts along expressways, and then have standards for minimum distance from other billboards, other signs, and residential structures. So we are hoping you all will think about, as you're reviewing these standards, if Fremont should consider a similar approach, or if the city should continue to prohibit these signs as they do currently.
Thoughts on billboards?
A lot of them that are currently located in town don't provide visibility anyway.
Yeah.
And I would like to see those kind of grandfathered out as they age out.
Areas of the community where billboards perhaps may be more appropriate?
kind of curious why we wouldn't want to allow some billboards along our major expressways, even if 50 years from now they're on 23rd Street or something. What, some sort of a time restriction on that, you could a 25-year lease or whatever you want to call it on the ability to erect a billboard in a given location.
I don't know if you could sunset that or not, can you?
Contract clause issue. Kind of taking time
If we are to look at allowing electronic off-premise signs, we would want to follow something similar to Columbus and Omaha that helps us. Areas and distances where it might allow.
Would that help as far as the contractors that actually do that type of work to understand the codes then, as far as the communities? By doing that, I mean, if you had a sign company that comes out of Omaha, they would know what they're required in Omaha, would follow suit for Fremont also. In that regard.
Well, yeah, that can be closer.
Yeah.
But almost with the different communities are gonna be a little different, so
Okay.
there's gonna be local variation. But I guess my recommendation is if we want to go there, then gotta limit how we go there.
Okay.
And along with the drafts of these articles, we can certainly send links to the Omaha and Columbus standards if you want to take a closer look at those as well and see if perhaps those may be appropriate in some form or fashion here in Fremont.
Besides the brightness of electronic billboards.
Especially near residential areas could definitely be an issue. Yep. All right, well, are there any other questions, comments, concerns with the materials presented today? I know you haven't had a chance to look at the drafts themselves, so I doubt you have very specific questions, but happy to address anything before you're able to get your hands on those documents and take a closer look. All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you again and look forward to the next time that we are together, where we'll be presenting more of the review and approval processes, how you really get all this development done. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
I need a motion to adjourn from the city council.
So moved.
Okay. Go on, like Dan. Ellis?
Yes.
Hannah?
Yes.
Yoder?
Yes.
Jensen?
Yes.
Supra?
Yes.
Lake Band? Yes. Vaughn?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0 there. Planning commission, motion to adjourn.
Nielsen, Carlson. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll make a motion.
Sorry.
Second.
Nielsen, Carlson. Morris.
Aye.
Warsaw. Lakewood. Aye. Baker. Sawyer.
Aye.
Layla.
Aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Way back across.
I think maybe some of these were. Well, I'm coming to pitch. Nope. That's right. I hadn't said anything before, it's not remote.
I'm
okay.
Very nice.
We've got it in it July.
Your building.
You got your speech ready?
Oh, no, we're not.
Not the real speech.
Well, I'm glad I'm leaving.
If I'm elected president.
Yeah. My history lesson.
Hey, Steve.
Or things. You didn't know that things are here now, they're not there anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's why if I have to.
Exactly. This is like all day long. Yeah. We have to sign in. To be on, you know what I mean? Hi. Do we have to sign in? No. Hi, do we have to sign in to talk?
I see that. Folks at night have to take.
Check that out.
Are you gonna speak this first part?
Well, yes.
Gentlemen,
Let's see, when we're gonna.
You can't speak about, what's on the agenda, you gotta speak of past.
Past.
Yeah, you can't speak of what's on the agenda.
Uh,
Where did you get that?
No, I just wanna,
You can't talk about anything that is on the agenda, number 9 and 15. You can. We have to do Saturday. And I pointed out we should,
I never, you had a meeting Saturday?
yeah, but Thursday, we can do it. They let everybody know.
I never knew it.
But let me get one of those.
You could. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if you want to do that, let's move it in the agenda. I guess it would be, where do you want it?
Sooner than later.
After consent agenda. Okay. Okay. All right, the time is 6:30. We could go ahead and take our seats, city council members. All right, so from 6:30 to 7, we have open public comment. Gives any member of the public an opportunity to speak on any item that's not on the agenda for up to 5 minutes. If you do plan to speak, there is a sign-up sheet up front. Please sign in. There's also comment cards in the back. And again, this will be from 6:30 to 7.
When you're ready, Stephen, go ahead. Hi, good.
Steve Ray, 1445 North Irving Street, Fremont. I'd like to say something about the privilege motions that the council uses. Robert's Rules of Order, you're not to use them to just cut off discussion. It's happened lots of times. I mean, if you've had a discussion and it's dragged on, to table it or continue it or something, but not the first thing out of the box to come up with a privilege motion, because it basically just shuts down any of the council members' ability to say anything, because you have to vote on it right away. When I was on debate team and stuff, you didn't use that right away just to keep somebody from speaking their mind. And that's what you've done in the past on a lot of different things at times. It's come right out and, oh, we're gonna have a privilege motion, you vote on it. Yeah, you can vote it down and they can move on, but they should be, members of the council at least should be given a chance to speak or question what's going on before that happens. I'd like to see you not do that all the time. Just because there's things that you don't want to maybe discuss, or you think it's a moot point, they still have the right to have their say, whoever it is. Also, I'd like to ask where the police department is. We had that study and that thing where they came and presented 3 different proposals, and we've let money out. I mean, we budgeted some money for it. I've asked one councilman about it and he said, well, I haven't heard anything. I'd like to know the city to give people and the citizens an update as to where they're at, if they're talking about it, and I'm sure they are, but kind of what they're thinking. I mean, we had 3 different plans, which way you're leaning, what you're going on, what's going to happen. I've had several people discuss, well, what are they doing about it? Are we ever going to do anything? I think you owe it to the citizens of Fremont to let people know, and not just all at once say, this is what we've decided, kind of put it out there. That's what's happened in this council's chambers before. All at once something happens and nobody, well, we didn't know any of that was going on. So I think you owe it to the citizens to let them know, whoever's involved, to let them know kind of what's happening with that thing, because we've already put a lot of money out for that study and that firm to come. And I do know they said part of the thing was when we had the last vote, we didn't do the bonds right. They could have sold the bonds better, and that they'd be willing to do that. So I wondered if you're considering that or something. Just an update. Such a mess as we got.
Right.
Good evening, Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont. Two of the things that I wanted to touch on, Mr. Ray had touched on, but I do want to ask about the fire department. When the budgets were being discussed, and several of you pushed, rightly so, to have expansion of the fire department inclusive of personnel. Where has that gone? Where have the grants been? What's been applied for? What have we received? How many new hires have you actually added? Not through attrition, not through people retiring, but actually, where are your new additions to the fire department? Several of you spoke very eloquently that you were supportive of hiring new personnel, adding to the number count, but that hasn't happened. I just would like to know and have something put on the agenda in the near future, not distant, on what the status of that is, because there's been no response back. An item that Mr. Ray touched on as far as the police department. There's been crickets since the discussion of the law enforcement, and it failed miserably at its last election. Where's that at this point? Are you expanding? Are you building new? Are you existing? What's the status of that? You've got the money. And obviously the city has deep pockets because over $975,000 is being gifted back to purchasers of the tech park. So you've got the money. You've got the money because you're paying for the architectural fees for a hangar building that was not to be included as part of the terminal contract. So the city has the money. You've got the money for the police department. You've got the money for the new hires of the fire department. This is about safety first. This is about the safety of our community. If you're keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening in Fremont, there are more 9/11 calls, more than ever before. And it's continuing to grow as our community grows, which That happens as you add 1,000 people, you're going to add 10% more fire calls. But it's exponentially so. It's compounding itself. And with that comes police enforcement. Do you have enough manpower on the police department right now to respond to all the calls? You're adding a lot of housing. That means more people. And more people means more coverage, more calls both on the fire and on the police side of it. That is a true safety issue. Are you aware of some of the drug problems we have in this community, on how many drug calls that the officers go on? How many undercover task force operatives there has to be in this community in order to investigate? You're a city council who has to make the decisions for the good of all the people in the community, not just your wards, but for the good of the entire community. Mr. A also touched on another sticking point, and that's excluding the commentary of your fellow council people, as well as the public. When motions are made to shut down discussion, it deprives not only your council of discussion, open and free discussion, but you also exclude the public from any interaction. And so often, some of the information is so filtered and watered down that people don't even know what the zoning signs are in their community because they don't fall within that 300 to 350 feet. And things are quickly passed, and a third read rule is put in place before they're aware of what the change is. Information is to be shared, not restricted. And part of that means being open, whether you like some of the feedback you get or not isn't the issue. People should have the right to interject, comment, and share their opinions and concerns with you, not be fearful of being shut down or excluded from the conversation. So I appreciate Mr. A's comment, and I support his comments 100%, but please take it to heart. Some of these have been brought to me, one about the police department and some of the things occurring. I would advise that you check in with them and find out what's really going on in your community and what the needs are. You are lacking in personnel, and it's not going to get any better. And this is something you need to address sooner than later and not hope like hell you get a grant to support it. Thank you.
Sir. Yep, go ahead.
Paul Von Baron, 2046 East 30th. You know, sometimes it's good to talk about the good things that happen in this city and think about the differences that they make. We had one recently that we were told by the people of Deerfield. There was a developer there who was looking at a development, obviously, next to them, and simply sat down with the homeowners association. And from what I understood, it's a fairly smooth process. Out of that, as they talked through what was going to happen, they worked through the drainage plan. He was advocating some 4-story buildings and some 2-story, and I believe he conceded to put the 2-story next to the residential and the 4-story in the rear, where it would create more of a residential look. I think there was a Landscaping, there were some open spaces. There was even a bioswale detention area. Sally, you're grinning. You could probably fill in some gaps for me. But it sounds like it went pretty well. And one of the things, this is not to grind an axe at all, but one of the things that I think we need to think about is that governing and developing are two utterly different functions. I've worked in a couple of the largest corporations in the world, and they don't do well at communication. They have a lot of formal processes where they talk to each other. You can get into meetings, you can write emails, you can submit comments, you can do all of those things. But to a business, they are lousy at communication, simply because there is no format or way to do it conveniently. My only point is that as you look at the tech park, and I think that's fundamentally a good project, but the city has really stepped into a different role. You're no longer government there. You are a developer. And the attributes and the conduct and they're not necessarily better. They're just simply different than city government has to be. Now, on the extreme, I'll give the worst one I can think of is there was a resident had some concerns, and they were actually told that the city can do anything it wants with its property. I don't think that's the attitude that pervades, but it is so difficult. I guess I would challenge you to consider your dual role. You're in the role of government. You're also in the role of a developer. And the question is, do we hold ourselves as a city to the same standards that we would a regular developer? Are we doing the site plans? And believe me, I don't know city code, but my understanding is that site plans have to be developed before the development is approved, with easements and landscaping and setbacks and all of the details. And I really don't know the answer to this question, but has that been done for the tech park? Has that been site plan been developed and approved? Not critical, not grinding an axe in any way. I'm just asking you to think about, you've got two roles. You're stepping on one side into the government and the governing body. You're stepping on the other side into an active developer, which actually requires quite a different set of behaviors in many cases. So I'm not sure what's right or wrong, but it's worth some thought as you develop. This is a big project, has a big impact on Fremont. And the fact that the city has positioned itself as a developer gives the entire city a stake in that development. So don't mean to talk in circles, but I think it's a thought question worth considering. Thank you.
Okay, the time is 7 o'clock. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Go ahead and open the regular city council meeting. The time is 7 o'clock. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. This time we'll have roll call.
Please vote for roll call. 7 council members are present, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item 1 is a motion to adopt the current agenda for the June 28th, 2022 regular meeting. Any changes to the agenda? Councilman Vaughn?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to adopt the current agenda with one change, moving item number 15 to after the consent agenda, please.
Okay. Councilman Jensen?
That was the move I was going to suggest. I'll just second that if that's a motion.
Okay. Motion and second to amend the agenda to move item 15 after consent agenda. Okay, cast your votes to amend the agenda.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
Okay, take a motion. Is there any other changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I take a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Councilman Jensen.
I'll make the motion to adopt the agenda as amended.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to mayor's comments. I just have a couple of things I'd like to mention. Obviously, July 4th is coming up, a great day in our country, Independence Day. And as I could already hear behind me, we have some fireworks going off. So I just want to remind people that fireworks can be shot off from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. up until July 3, and then 12 p.m. to July 4th. So I just ask the public, please be mindful of your neighbors, of your safety, cleaning up after you're done. I know, this is a busy time for not only our fire department, our police department, and just please be mindful and respectful of your neighbors. Obviously, we want you to, celebrate our independence, and fireworks is a part of that. But again, please, be mindful and responsible. We don't want any injuries or, any additional hardship because of the fireworks. So other thing I'd like to mention is we won't have a meeting before before John C. Fremont Days. So I just want to mention John C. Fremont Days is July 8th through 10. Just a great community festival, and appreciate the board and the work that's been doing to create John C. Fremont Days every year. It is a lot of work, and I know they're still looking for volunteers to help out. Definitely attracts a lot of folks into our community. And so if you're not planning to participate, I plan to attend the events. If you would like to volunteer, sure they'd be able to help you volunteer in a lot of aspects. So just again, encourage you to attend John C. Fremont Days and enjoy the festival. That's all I have for comments. I'd move on to public hearings. Item 2, resolution 2022-102, recommending approval of the Class C liquor license application of Blue Shore LLC, doing business as Lakeshore Marina Convenience Store at 1440 West Military Avenue. I'll have the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is for a Class C liquor license, as was stated. We do have the application materials and the reports from the police department and planning department, and their recommendation is to approve the liquor license. The notice for tonight's hearing was in the newspaper on June 17th, 2022. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing, resolution 2022-102. Seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Are there any additional comments from council? Councilman Jensen.
I just say I'm familiar with this property. It's been closed. If this will help get that property open, that's an area of our town that's really underserved as far as community stores or anything. There isn't much down in here anymore, and we could sure use it open back up again.
Councilwoman Ganem.
If there are no other comments, I would move to approve resolution 2022-102.
Okay, Councilman Sukram. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to the consent agenda, all items in the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or a citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda from council, the public, or staff? I need to remove item 6. I need some additional information still for that item to be able to approve it. So. Are there any other items to be removed from the consent agenda? Okay. Because I just need to continue it, I guess I'd take a motion to continue item 6. Councilman Jensen.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Councilman Legband.
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Then I'd take a motion to approve the consent agenda items 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Councilman Legband.
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8.
Councilman Vaughn.
I will second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 15. Report on status of detention cell berm at Fremont Technology Park and selection of preferred alternative with consideration of resolution 2022-108. We'll now have staff report. Our Public Works Director.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Dave Godigan, Director of Public Works. This item was put on the agenda because there were numerous requests from the property owners, primarily in Central Park, that abut the area where the detention cell is on the tech park, particularly drainage from the backyards and the berm that's built adjacent to the detention cell. I'm going to back up about a year here and kind of, for everyone's benefit, give a little bit of a history on how we got to where we are tonight. The fall and winter of 20 and 21, city staff was directed to design the improvements at the tech park. At the time, we were designing basically Lincoln Avenue and 29th Street, kind of that L-shaped piece. And during the process of designing this, the city sold additional lots. So we added on to the design that we did. And in March 30th of 2021, City Council awarded the bid for the improvements at the tech park. So the contractor began construction in April of 21. Beginning in April 21, due to the sale of the lots and to clean up outstanding platting in the tech park, the planning department, city staff was preparing, with the assistance of the city's engineering consultant, the platting for the tech park. That began in April, went back and forth. And the request from the neighbors was primarily dealing with the tech park, a site plan approval, and the site plan approval included a detention cell. The original study that the consultant had a detention cell size to contain the 25-year storm. After a great deal of discussion, the consultant was directed to go back, update the drainage study, and implemented a 100-year storm detention cell on the property. And the cell was to be built on the eastern perimeter of the property. The drainage study included site plans showing the size of the cell, location of the cell, and basically a visual barrier berm between the detention cell and the property owners adjacent to the cell, which would be those homes on the west side of Laverna Street in Central Park subdivision. In the middle of all this, our contractor was digging the detention cell based on plans that we had from the consultant, and began construction, and they were using the detention cell material for fill on the site. So, and then in September of last year, City Council approved change order number 1, which addressed the additional fill, et cetera, to bring the contractor whole on the items for the construction of the project. And as the project has progressed, property owners did begin contacting the city. Well, how does the water drain out of our backyards? What is the berm here for? And, you know, staff met with them, spoke with them on the phone, emails, et cetera, from people that contacted myself and the planning director. And I believe some of them contacted the city administrator and mayor as well. And all through the process, we stated that we have a dirt working contractor on site. We're moving towards this project. We're moving the dirt. And at some point in time, we will come along prior to the end of the project and address the drainage, whether it be with drainage pipes or dig a swale or, you know, some other method. So that brings us to tonight. So the question was, what do we do with the drainage in the backyards? And so in my staff report, I am proposing remove the berm altogether, because the berm is there strictly for visual. The berm is not there as a flood prevention or a levee or anything like that, because the ends of the berm are lower than, or at the same elevation as the original ground level. So as the water would come up, let's say during a 100-year flood, the water's just going to run around the berm, and the berm is going to essentially be an island. So I guess the options that staff came up with is remove the berm, have the contractor come in with their excavator and just remove the berm, grade it so the water drains through there, and then the drainage or the water being retained in the backyards would drain away naturally as it did prior when it was a cornfield. The second option would be to install a system of pipes that could extend into the yards with inlets, et cetera, that would do essentially the same thing, and it would drain the water away. And and then it would still have the berm there, but the berm would be a visual barrier, I guess, from the backyards, not being able to just have a full view of a detention cell and what it's developed beyond. The berm is approximately 2 to 3 feet high. And I think it's about 1,300 feet long, something like that. So I guess that's my staff report.
Okay. Any questions? Councilman Legband?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I just want to say, I went out and spent 2 hours, not the past Saturday, but the Saturday before, and I went and visited people that were home at the time and asked them questions and their concerns about the berm and all their concerns. About 95% of the people said they wanted the berm gone. Main reason being to help with maintenance. And when I went out there, it had not been maintained very well. And they had great points of it being sloped, such at a steep slope. They couldn't mow, and I totally agree with them. They couldn't mow and couldn't help maintain it. I know in the past couple of days, though, it has been maintained now, but I get it, because I still, even though the city's going to maintain it, the city may not maintain it as nice as I would like it. So I live on 19th Street, so I have a ditch in my backyard. So when I mow and weed eat, a lot of times I will still go in the ditch and weed eat and mow even though I don't have to, but I will help maintain the back other side of my fence. So I totally get that, understand that, what they said about wanting to maintain it. Another person said that they would like to see maybe some blue spruce trees or things planted out there to help hide it. And I thought that's a great idea until I thought about the wiring. So the wires, and I know the city has to get out there and get to those electrical wires. But I think about everyone said they would like some kind of a buffer there, whether it be some smaller trees, shrubbery, some kind of buffer between their backyard and the retention ponds, if that's doable. And that's what a lot of people had liked. Also, I guess I have to ask you, does the water is from both retention ponds, does it drain from the north to the south?
Yes, when it was originally designed, that north pond was to drain north into the 32nd Street ditch. However, there's a water line, there's a gas line. I believe there's a gas line. I should take that back. There's a water line, there's a sewer line, and there's a fiber optics line in there. And we exposed all three of those last year. And they are in such a location that you physically can't fit a pipe through there. So to drain the north one north, we would have to go in and adjust those utilities so that we can get a pipe through there. I'm not saying that we can't or shouldn't do that. To get this project complete, it's a project for another day, let's say. So we put a tube that drains the north one to the south one, which could be, plugged up in the future.
Okay, and then they also said there are parts where it doesn't drain. There's stagnant water in some parts. Is that going to be worked on by the contractor, hopefully leveling it out a little bit? Because I know it's not done. So are they going to work on that, try and level out the ground underneath there a little better in the retention pond?
Yes, and if we choose, or the council chooses tonight to have the berm removed, that's where I would put that material from the berm.
Try and level it out?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Also, some people brought up a good point. They said all the culverts are at a high or higher than the bottom of the retention ponds. Can you tell me why that is? Were they put in wrong, or why the culverts are up higher than the retention ponds?
Well, on the south one, it probably is due more to the fact, and it's only slight. I mean, it's a small amount. On the south one, it's probably more due to the elevation of the ditch, the Rawhide Creek ditch, Rawhide Creek, I guess you could call it. So we tried to stay as high as we could so that our pipe isn't like down in the flow line causing problems in the Rawhide Creek. And on the north one, I guess you could say it was probably just an oversight.
Okay, another thing they asked me is, have we been out there to inspect their work yet? Or since it's not done, have we not inspected their work yet?
I'm out there every day. Pete Geegan, the city's inspector, when we're out there paving, he's there virtually all day long. We're out there. Myself or one of my staff is there every day. I'm virtually every day I'm out there.
Okay, I'm starting to get close around time now. My next question, is there another berm on the west side? Because someone asked me, they thought there was a berm on the west side also.
No, the west side is natural grade.
Okay, about the only other thing, and it seems like about everybody said they think the work that has been done by the contractor so far has been shoddy at best. And so I just want to let you know that so you can keep an eye on their work, because just about everyone that I talked to, that's how they felt too.
Okay.
Councilman Vaughn.
I'm in full support of removing this berm. I think that's the only logical we can reach here. The only question I really had was, I believe, and maybe I don't want to misquote you, that you had said it was somewhere in the ballpark of $100,000 to remove that a couple of meetings ago, and now we're down to in the $25,000 neighborhood. If I'm misquoting you, I apologize. I thought I had heard that.
If I said that, I apologize, but it's I think my cost estimate is 25,000, and that's just based on the contractor's price per cubic yard and how many cubic yards are in the berm.
Okay, thank you. And I would also support some greenery, shrubbage, something in that area.
Yeah.
Councilman Yerger?
So I'm glad you clarified one thing for me in my list of questions. You said the berm removal will take 24 to 30 inches or perhaps even more. You said as much as 3 feet in order to lower it to yard height. Is that correct?
We would take the berm, lower it down to original grade. Original grade, it kind of depends on where you're at on the berm, 2 to 3 feet.
Okay, that was my calculation from being out there as well. So my question, follow up to that is, what does that do to the areas on the north and south ends of the detention area? Do those also have to be lowered?
No, those are still at whatever grade it was when we originally
So
dug
they
it.
don't match up with the berm height today, that they're 2 feet, 3 feet lower than the berm on the east?
They're at natural grade. The berm, the term is trails off. It just trails off and it just stops. So the top of the berm, let's say, is 1184, I think it is. The ground level is 1182 to 1183. So it just goes from 1184, 1182. The berm just ends.
Okay, I didn't take any mechanical devices out there, but it didn't look like that to me, Dave, just from visual inspection as to those things being north and south grade on the ends of the berms didn't appear to be 2 to 3 feet lower than the east bank, but if you say that it is, but it didn't look like it to me. And that gave me some pause as to once you lower the east side berm, if that's the plan, then where does the water go? It can't go north and south if it's still trapped in the detention areas. It's got to go east if it overflows, and that would be a problem.
If the detention cell gets to that point, the Rawhide Creek is going to be flooding.
Also interested in that statement that you made with regards to the, we can't put the drainage to the north where it was originally platted and planned. Is that correct?
At this point in time, because there physically are utilities in the way, we cannot get through.
That was a plat design, wasn't it?
It was a design that the consultant had done.
When we adopted the plat and grading
Yes,
plans.
yes.
So the fact that we're not going to do that, does that call for a change in plans? Officially a change in plan? Because we're not going to do it.
Not really, because the original plan of the detention cell that we gave to the contractor was just to dig it. I mean, when we did the change order, it was just to dig it. And then the change order just said, outlet structures, and he's done the outlet structures.
Is the detention cell on the north side graded to go towards a drainage on the north, or was it graded to drain in the middle and into the southern?
It's essentially flat, so it would go either way.
Well, I know there's a section in between the two.
Yes.
So where the water was supposed to flow, I just wondered if it was graded one to go to the south and one to go to the north in the first place. You're saying it was flat.
That's basically flat. There's low spots out there, but essentially it's flat. When I say flat, I mean, it's within 6 inches. I mean, it's dirt. I mean,
and the height with the berm intact today is 1,183 feet. If I read the GEO drawings correctly, we'd be taking that down 3 feet.
No, we'll be taking it down to whatever the original grade was.
Right,
I mean, we
approximately 3 feet, because they built it up to 1,183.
I would say 2 to 3 feet.
Okay.
In some areas, it's 2 feet. Some areas, it's about 3 feet, because the yards do this as well.
How does that grade level correspond with where we're putting the street levels in and where the properties will be built on in Tech Park? Will those properties and the streets be elevated to beyond what they are today?
Yes.
So what will the grades be on Tech Park properties once they're built on? Do you have any idea relative to the 1,100?
They'll all be slightly different, because as you go farther west, the floodplain elevation is a foot higher. The floodplain elevation at the southeast corner, and this is from the state, is an 1184. So that means the base flood elevation of a 100-year storm from the Rawhide Creek is 1184. The ground elevation at that corner is an 1182 point something. Let's say 1182. And so when they build the lots, let's say if you're in 1184.5, you have to be a foot higher than the base flood elevation. So your building's good. Let's say it's going to be an 1185 or an 1186.
Okay. You also indicated that there was a site plan filed relative to this, like any other developer would have filed. And a part of that would have been the grading plan. Part of that would have been the landscaping plan. and the necessary setbacks, easements, and boundary lines as well, right?
I don't remember if there was a landscape plan in there or not, but I was just looking through the packets from the previous meetings. In the drainage report that was introduced in July, there is a site plan in there showing kind of the grading layout of the subdivision. And then one of the subsequent meetings after that, I think it was in September, October of last year, there was a grading plan with the packet for the platting of the lots. I don't remember if it was preliminary plat or final plat, but there was a grading plan in there as well.
Okay, I see my time's up, but I have one last question, if you wouldn't mind, and that is, is the easement on this east side of the detention cells relative to the citizens' property and the city's property, a 20-foot easement or a 40-foot easement, because this is part of a waterway?
On the city's property, the tech park, there's two easements there. I'll start with the tech park. It originally was 100 feet, and that was to reflect the 25-year detention cell. That was modified as this went back and forth from the Planning Commission, City Council, to a wide enough easement to contain the 100-year cell. And it's kind of an oddball number. It's 148, let me read here. 148.2 feet from the east property line to the west. And it's just called a detention cell easement, drainage easement, but it also kind of ties it in with the utility easement, even though there are no utilities over there. Now, on the Central Park lots that abut the tech park, their westerly property line, there's a 10-foot.
On their side of the fence.
On their side of the fence, yes.
And I was kind of looking for the corresponding on the city side would be another 10-foot, so 20-foot easement.
Well, it doesn't even list that. I think it was just included in the drainage easement.
Okay. My time's up, so I'll yield.
Okay, any other questions for staff at this point? Seeing none, any comments from the public?
My name is Jennifer Schneckenberger. I live at 3049 Laverna. I am on the furthest north house, and there is still a silk fence up starting from my gate and then wrapping around, which doesn't even really hold the berm. It's flat there, but they can't mow the grass that's this high next to the silk fence. So still behind my property and along the side there is full of weeds. They also can't mow too close to the properties. So if we could get rid of that silk fence, we could maybe get our mower back behind our fence, like Mark had mentioned. And thank you, Mark, for answering all those questions. Very good. So we just kind of like to find out why there's still the silk fences up on the north and south side of our properties that kind of wrap around, and they're not able to mow those areas because of the silk fence. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
Paul Von Beer on 2046 East 30th, Fremont. We're all 21. So I think the elephant in the room on this one is just the sting that we've felt a little bit from the fight that we had to go through last year. And at the same time, I will say, had it not been for the help of the council, we never would have gotten that resolved. So again, we thank you for that. But the thing that happened all during that, if you remember last May, the council mandated that this be one outlot. And it took until December to decide whether it was going to be 2 or 1 or 5 or 6 at one point, because the plan kept changing. And we respect the fact, we appreciate those of you who have come out to look, but back to my comment earlier about development, looking isn't a conversation. We still have a lot of questions. The berm could be the best solution, but the questions are, what about landscaping? What about the maintenance? What about rodent control, mosquitoes, the things that wetlands draw. What truly does happen, I believe all the businesses that are going to be in the tech park have been encouraged to raise their elevations at least 2 feet above the current levels. So I would assume that's been accounted for. But what we've been asking for simply is a conversation to just put these things down. Coming to see something is not communication. And we've still got a lot of questions that are unanswered. And actually, they're pretty easy to answer. It's just a matter, I think, of us sitting down. But the other thing that left a little bit of a sting was when we asked, the only vehicle we could think of was the study session. And the first thing out of the chute was a privileged motion, which basically shut the 8 or 10 of us who had come to the meeting to speak down, and will you please leave? And what we're asking is, before you do something like this, we're in fundamental agreement with the berm, but we've got a lot of questions, I think, that affect the livelihood and the property values of the people along Laverna Street. And what we would like to ask, I'll give you another just frank perception. When that privilege motion was made on the 14th, it was basically perceived as, well, come back on the 28th and you can see what we're going to give you. What we would like is to just dispel all of that. We don't believe for a minute that's your intent. What we would like is this, even a simple informal conversation would be fine. But we've just got a series of questions regarding landscaping, maintenance. I would assume the detention pond is adequate. Does shutting down the north side really and restricting the flow out of there, shutting down one drainage option, is that truly the best thing? Probably stuff that you can answer very quickly, very easily, staff. But before you approve anything, what we're asking you to do is just give us the simple courtesy of a conversation and just help us to understand the intent and the implications and all the things that would go on in providing the berm solution. So that's our basic request. Our basic request would be that you not approve this as it is tonight. But if we could have a conversation and just simply work through those things, I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it's just best to understand. Thank you.
Jerry Delaney, 2940 Laverna Street. I'd like to start off by saying that in the past 2 weeks, I've had some very open conversations on this issue with the mayor, with Councilman Lightman and Councilman Yerger. And I'd like to publicly thank all of them for their time and say that I personally believe that each of you has a genuine desire to properly resolve this tech park issue. I could see that and hear that in the emotion of the conversations with all of you. I would like to clarify a few things, though, that have been stated, not just tonight, but over the past. I definitely want to clarify, it has been stated that the berm was originally put in at the request of property owners that adjoin it. In fact, I've talked to almost everyone along there, and everyone says, no, it was never requested. We never considered that from our point of view as people that live next to it as an aesthetic thing. It's quite the opposite. It's been a topic of complaints ever since the first day of its construction. Excuse me. In light of this, removing the berm appears to be an obvious solution and a fairly simple one. However, we all know that there haven't been any easy solutions to any of the drainage issues in the tech park from day one. Here are just a few examples of the questions that still need to be answered before this solution can be implemented. And I know Councilman Lightman brought up a lot of questions tonight, so did Councilman Yerger. But there are still some that lie in the minds of a lot of the people that live around the tech park area. For one, if not for aesthetics, why exactly was the berm put there in the first place? There had to have been some logical reason. I suspect that probably the only one that can answer that's our previous city administrator, and he's no longer here. So we're not going to get an answer to that question. But we want to make sure that removing the berm, although it appears to all of us to be a good solution, we want to make sure that there aren't any negative effects that may or may not come out of that. You know, we have some questions on how it will be flattened. How do you flatten out a berm and get it the property of 27 properties that all vary in elevation theirself to now drain across one new elevation? What are the rest of the plans for the retention pond itself? I had noted that I was going to ask about the culvert to the north end. Dave noted that there's some issues with that, and it's probably not going to be put in, but that wasn't, he didn't really give a definite yes or no. What's the plan for maintenance and upkeep of the entire pond area? You know, what's going to be done to minimize potential issues caused by standing water that will happen from time to time? You know, what are the plans from landscaping? There have been some mentions tonight, possibly greenery, possibly bushes. Nothing really definite. We've got a partial solution on the board here. These are just a few among many questions that I and everybody feel warrant further discussion on this topic before you come to a final decision tonight. And yes, we have had opportunities to speak and express some of our concerns, but we've not been given the opportunity to meet with and discuss in a back and forth dialogue with the developers of the tech park. By the developers, I mean the city of Fremont. We haven't been given the same courtesies that would typically be extended by a private developer. All we're asking for is to be treated the same way that any other neighbors would be treated by any other developer in the city. Everyone knows that there's a great deal of mistrust in our city's leadership. And that falls on all of you, even though a lot of you had nothing to do with that reputation that has been earned over a number of years. And it's not just mistrust by the people in Central Park and the Cambridge area around the tech park. It's a citywide deal. And after the conversations I've had the last couple of weeks, I mentioned earlier, I know and I truly believe that our mayor, our new city administrator, and many members on the council are truly committed to regaining this trust in the city. And I believe that most of you are very sincere in this commitment. But denying further discussion on an issue like this, when it's been asked for over and over again, and just saying, we've heard enough, we're going to move on, doesn't do much to show the sincerity behind your commitment. I think a meeting of some sort and further discussion on this topic needs to be held before you move forward on a decision tonight for two reasons. It's typical developer behavior, what's typically done, it's standard procedure. And number two, and most importantly, it will move this council and our city's new administration miles down the road to regaining the trust and confidence of the people in this city. I hope you'll take that into consideration. Thank you for your time.
Any additional comments from the public? Okay. Seeing none, again, any additional comments from council? Councilman Yurger.
I have some other questions, but in light of what I just heard, I'll yield to any council member that has follow-up questions to what they just heard before I would embark on any discussion, even though I have the mic. But so does anyone have questions or comments that they want to make relative to what we just heard? Okay, hearing none then.
Councilwoman Ganem.
Oh, sorry, I
Go ahead with yours.
I'll certainly yield to whatever you want to ask.
Go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead, Councilman Yurger.
In light of what we just heard and in light of the pleas that we've had both in the private meetings and discussions I've had with the public and what's been expressed here tonight, I firmly believe that we're not in a position to take action on this item tonight, even though we may be approaching something that's close to some resolution. We're obviously not quite there. I think the pleas here were pretty significant. And because of that, I'm going to make a motion that we should continue this item until the city has held a meeting with the HOA and its resident population there. That can be held rather quickly. I assume the city wants to be on a timeline that moves this along as quickly as possible. So I would hope that the residents would take advantage of that, but I can't schedule a date certain. I'd just like to make this a continuance until after the city has met with the HOA to resolve the items that have been presented yet here tonight and give them the opportunity for the dialogue that they want to have, not just to raise issues as they've been doing in the last couple of meetings, but to actually have dialogue and answers to their questions made so that we can get to the point that Mr. Delaney just made at the end of his in the rebuilding of the trust. So I make a motion to continue this item until after a meeting with the HOA has occurred.
Councilman Yerger, can you just clarify what you mean by city? Do you mean a study session with the entire council present, or do you mean just the administration meeting, or?
I think it can be an administration meeting.
Okay.
Obviously, that kind of a meeting, we already have another agenda item that would deal with this more formally. But certainly any kind of a meeting that you would put together with an HOA, representatives of council could attend.
As long as there wasn't a quorum. present.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting that an informal meeting may get what the residents want as a way of dealing with this, and we can just, put off voting on what's before us tonight with regards to just cutting down the berm as the solution until we've cleared up the rest of the questions with the HOA.
Okay, Councilman Vaughn.
Have any concerns with timing as far as contractor availability, resources, things like that? Wouldn't want to miss our opportunity if there was a window.
Well, our contractor is going to be on the site probably into August at a minimum. Now, however, if we take the berm out, because this was a site plan and it was approved by the city council and the planning commission, whatever happens with the berm, let's say we're going to take it out, that will have to go back to planning commission for their approval. So if it's not decided by the July meeting for planning commission to present it to planning commission, then it goes to the August planning commission, which just kicks us back another month. That would be my only concern.
No.
Okay, there's a motion to continue, so we need to address that. Is there a second? Councilman Ellis?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay. Moving on to item 9. This is Council Member Yerger item, motion to approve the scheduling of a formal study session for the June 21, 2022 at 6 p.m. at City Hall. Again, this was moved last meeting to continue. So that's why it's on the agenda, even though the meeting was last week or scheduled for last week. So council just needs to take formal action on this to and based on what we just went through, I guess I open it up for council discussion. So Councilman Yerger.
This was my agenda item from the previous meeting that was continued to this session. In light of the action that the council just took on the previous item, there's no real need for us to formally have a formal study session because the HOA will have their opportunity for interactive dialogue, which is what they wanted all along. So I'm happy to withdraw this item from consideration on tonight's agenda.
Okay. Is there any other action we need on that? Legal, okay. All right, moving on to new business. Item 10, resolution 2022-104, approving the request residents to close Nelson Lane from North Wyoming Avenue to Hogan Lane on July 2nd, 2022. Now staff report.
Mayor and council, we received this request from residents along Nelson Lane to close a portion of the street for a neighborhood event. Their letter is included in the backup documentation. I spoke with with Dave and our police and fire chiefs with regards to this, and they hesitate to close streets for neighborhood parties such as this. The reasons for that are listed in the staff report. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. While the recommendation is to deny the request, I have included the event materials as far as the resolution and the agreement if the council so decides to approve the request. Be happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Ellis?
Tyler, I've done this many times through a nonprofit. And the reason we do it through the nonprofit is to encourage community buildment and community enthusiasm. And I'm not really seeing a lot of difference here between my nonprofit asking for a street to be closed and residents wanting to have a neighborhood party. So I'm just a little concerned, not concerned. I know we've not done this in the past, but I'm wondering if we could reconsider that option tonight with some good discussion, because it wouldn't take much for, a nonprofit to come in and do it for them. So I'm just trying to figure out what's the difference between a nonprofit and for residents. So I'd like to open up for discussion.
I think the difference in this situation would be it's not really a status of a nonprofit versus a private citizen. It's really a location issue. Especially during this time of year with, getting through neighborhoods and things like that, police and fire access. As I listed out in the staff report, concerns include traffic flow through neighborhoods, neighbors not participating in the event may not be in favor of the street closure. Typically, in speaking with the police and fire departments, there's upwards of as many as a dozen requests such as this. What's occurred in the past when they did allow things like this is you would have barricades, someone would circumvent the barricade, and that would result in the person operating the event calling and complaining, taking resources from this event, from taking care of the community in general during a busy time during the 4th of July in this instance, and focusing it there instead of other places where those forces might be needed. And potential expense, while it may be small, it does exist. That's what was provided. So really just the location issue and that, but it looks like the police chief can elaborate.
Go ahead, please.
Chief Elliott. Good evening, Jeff Elliott, Chief of Police. I really hate to rain on these people's parade because I know that a lot of people want to do this, but I stand opposed to this, and there's a reason why. And basically is every summer I get dozens of these calls for people that want to shut down the street to have a block party. And there's all sorts of problems this creates. It's not like shutting down a downtown section for a sanctioned event that an organization is having. What happens is you're looking at a residential area. The multiple people live in these blocks, okay? In this particular case, the diagram you look at, they have it set up so it's only affecting the people that want to do it. But there are other people that live in the neighborhood that want to drive down that street, and they get upset when they can't, and they drive around the barricades. And then the people that have the party become upset and they call the police. And then we got to go out there and deal with these things. It's not so much that this is one, if this was the only incident that we had all year, yeah, it's not a big deal, but I get lots of people, especially around the 4th of July, that call me. They call over City Hall first, and City Hall very much appreciatively sends them to me, and I get to explain to these people that I oppose it. And I tell everybody the reasons why, and I tell them that the council makes the ultimate decision. You guys get to call, but if it comes to that, I'm going to get up and tell you that I oppose it. It creates parking problems. It upsets neighbors that are not involved in the incident, and it creates law enforcement calls that don't need to occur. I'm opposed to it, but if you absolutely insist on doing something like this, my opinion is that the city put together some sort of policy and issue a permit and charge a fee and put this thing together rather than just allow these things to go forward like this. It's easier for me that if you just say no, that's what I prefer. But if you decide that that's what you want to do, I suggest that we go the route of creating a permit system to do that. I'll take any questions.
Councilman Vaughn.
I just had some general comments, not necessarily for you, Chief. To me, this is slightly different in addition to what Mr. Ellis has said. The street layout's a little different in that neighborhood, as we don't have the typical north, south, east, west streets with higher flowing volume of traffic. If anybody's ever spent a 4th of July holiday weekend night or two out in Washington Heights, there's not much traffic flowing through there anyway. And any traffic that is flowing through is creeping at a very slow pace because of the volume of people that are lighting off fireworks. And seeing this conglomeration of neighbors come together, I think, to foster that sense of community spirit, I would actually be in support of this, because it is a bit of a one-off, and it's not the run of the mill, I want to shut it down just for a party. If you had read through the applicant's letter, he even makes mention of some of the handicapped children in wheelchairs that would be able to have a little bit more freedom of movement without as much risk for vehicular traffic impacting them. And I think that's a good thing, that we would help cater and have a good time for some of those types of people. I would be in favor of this.
Okay. Councilman Ellis, you're on.
I'm sorry. I wanted to talk with the Chief Elliott. I appreciate your comments, and I understand that, I think. And I would be for moving forward with a policy in the future to make this a little bit more, if it can become a norm, then becomes a norm within the standards that we set. And so I will take that upon myself to work with something in the future to build a policy within our municipal code that will codify the ability for this to happen in an orderly manner. So I think as a city, we probably should try to encourage community bonding. I guess that's a good word for it. And so this, I guess, is kind of a one-off, but I would commit to making this a policy change for the city of Fremont in the future.
Councilman Legman.
Mayor, if I briefly can just throw in here, this street closure agreement, I do not recommend the council agree to authorize the mayor to sign this at all. We're not going to be leasing streets to private citizens. I agree with the chief. It should be a permit process that applicants can apply for a permit just like anything else in this type of vein. But I would only approve it if the council would like to approve it, if there's proof of an insurance policy taken out for the properties. Right. But I would not recommend approving this agreement as it's written.
Okay, Councilman Legman.
Yeah, is the street that they want blocked off, is it a fairly busy thoroughfare through Milliken Park area?
It's just a regular residential street. There's no, it's no busier or no less busy than any of the other streets in the area.
To me, I really don't have much of a problem with it, but if you look at it, cars that want to get through there and then the road's blocked off, they're going to have to go a long ways around. Like you said, there's no east, west, north, south, easy ways to get out there. And if that street's blocked off, now I'm going to have to go, or whoever's going to have to go a long way around to get through. And I can see people getting upset saying, I'm not driving a mile around to get around this, and going, instead they go through the barricades, and then the next thing it's a dangerous situation.
My
So-
situation with this too is not so much that, I think the people in this particular, I must have talked to this guy at some time, because I think he's tried to address some of my concerns. The issue is not so much this particular one, it's all the other ones that I get. And while it's great to do that on the 4th of July, how many residential streets are you going to close down on the 4th? I mean, everybody and their dog's going to want their street closed down to do one of these things. I think it's bad public policy myself, but you guys decide that, not me. So knock yourselves out.
Councilman Jensen.
Yeah, in that vein, I would like to be accommodating, but I'm with the Chief Elliott. I'm looking down the road, I'm looking at the first time we have another party somewhere and somebody's underage and dies of alcohol poisoning or goes out in a car and kills somebody. And they're, well, what in the world is the city doing letting those kind of things go on? I certainly don't think we should let this go forward as it is and without creating some kind of policy at all, if we're going to do it at all.
Okay, Councilman Yerger.
So I have several questions, I guess. So the street closure agreement that was put in the packet, you're saying, council, that's different than whatever agreement we would need or policy we would need. This document doesn't serve that purpose? Because we use this for a lot of closures that, for parking place closures downtown and for other events, et cetera. We use this document. So this is not a permit?
No, as this is drafted, laid out the way it is, this is not sufficient to protect the city from liability.
Is it not sufficient to protect us in the other areas where we're using this form to do this? Because this form requires $1 million insurance policy.
Previous agreements that have been reviewed and approved, at least by legal, were sufficient to protect the city. I'm saying this is not sufficient.
For this particular application or this form for this application type?
We use this in downtown all the time.
Yes, it's the specific application of personal residences on a personal street when there's only one party agreeing to rent out this street. You can't cut off a residential street with a lease with one individual party.
Are you aware that they do that in other communities?
I'm telling you, the way it's written isn't going to work. You can.
I understand. I'm just asking.
We can bring
you-
it
I'm
into
just
as many
asking you-
hypothetical situations as you want.
I'm just
I'm
asking
not
you if-
recommend, I'm advising you not to approve this.
I understand
agreement.
that. I understand that, Council. I'm just asking you if other communities allow block parties. Do you know, for example, does Omaha allow block parties?
Certainly, there's an application process for block parties.
Thank you. That's all I really needed to hear from you in that regard. So thank you. I don't suppose the applicant's not here. So I had some questions for the applicant, if that's possible, because there was a request for the bounce house and potentially for fireworks. And I guess I had some questions for the applicant in that regard. We haven't gotten to public comment. So how will that
If you
work?
have any other comments at this point, I have a couple other council members that haven't spoke.
Okay.
And then we can get to that. Councilwoman Ganem.
No, a lot of the questions have already been asked by the time it gets to me here, but the nonprofits do have proof of insurance. And I know with smaller city, it would be nice. It's just that if you say yes to one, how would you say no to anyone else who applies and wants to close the street? And so many neighborhoods just do it anyway without asking permission first anyway. I mean, that's just a fact, watching what goes on. You just do it in your block. I lived on a block where people didn't drive through and we just did it. So without asking, I probably shouldn't admit that. However, I think right now I agree with Councilman Ellis. I'd be happy to work with you on developing some type of permit system first so that the city is in fact protected and we have some type of procedure process.
Okay, the only council member that didn't speak, I think of this is Councilman Sukram that has his light on. So go ahead.
Well, I think this is a great idea as well. I agree with Ellis and Councilman Vaughn about it, but I also agree with legal. There probably should be an application process to protect everybody involved. But definitely a great idea to my friends out in Washington Heights. And I would be willing to work with Councilman Ellis too on some kind of application for this. Thank you.
Okay, all right, we'll open it up for public comment. So if the applicant wants to come.
Okay, so I'm Eric Carty. I'm the one that had requested the street closure mainly due to I've been in the profession, the medical field for 20 plus years, and I see a lot of kiddos, or pediatrics to geriatrics that are in wheelchairs. Primarily, the request was certainly just for the safety of everybody in that area. There is three locations on that street. Instead of one applicant, there is three of us that would be happy to ensure that gathering for that afternoon. I guess just a little bit, just going back, I talked to Officer Bartoff, and then I'd also spoke to Tyler, and I was advised not to, or to reconsider taking this to the city council today, just for those reasons, those four main reasons. The cost to have somebody come out and to set up the barriers, the blocking of emergency routes, and then, of course, if one person is allowed, 30 other thousand people in Fremont would be allowed. And then not everybody on the block is likely to participate in our block party. And I guess I tried to lay that out, just making sure that everybody on the council understood that is just three of us on that block that would participate in that street closure. Kind of laid out the routes, hopefully to Tyler and the chief of police, to show that there was access to and from in the event there was any emergency. So other than that, I'm pretty sure where the council sets on this. I would, obviously, if this doesn't get passed today, I would certainly like to see the city of Fremont come up with a plan to be able to allow us to participate in community gatherings and just more or less, again, the safety. I'm a head baseball coach. I've participated in 20 plus years of coaching kids in our town. So it's nothing new for us to have gatherings, as you had spoke about, but we just wanted it to be a little safer. So.
Okay. Questions for the applicant? Councilman Yerger.
So in reading your application, it indicated that you were going to have a bounce house.
That is correct.
And I was interested is whether or not that would be placed in the street or on private property.
Private property.
Private property. So it doesn't create a street barrier for emergency use.
That is correct.
Or any other use of the street. Okay. You also had the indication that you would likely be doing fireworks.
Correct.
My question is, do you intend to set those fireworks off in the street or on private property?
That would be, so some of the fireworks are pretty hard to set off in your own driveway. So it'd be in the street like many other residents in Fremont do.
And you're aware of the insurance obligation that's been stated a couple of times. You said you're willing to take out the insurance.
Absolutely.
Correct. It looks like from what I can see, your neighbors in this area would have to traverse on Wyoming Street south to Dakota or up to Jones Drive. I don't know how many blocks that is to navigate, since they couldn't go through your area. I don't know how many blocks that is.
2.5 blocks.
Okay, so it's not an extensive reroute, but it would require reroute traffic.
It would, yes.
Okay. And you indicated that you would be prepared to do cleanup, et cetera. I assume that meant that the street would be opened at the time of your end of party, which would be at 12 o'clock. The barricades would be down, the streets would be open, and cleanup would be complete. Is that correct?
Yes. Fireworks stop at 11 o'clock that night, so it'd be cleaned up prior to the midnight.
Okay. Those are the questions I had for applicant.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont. With 4th of July comes a lot of block parties that aren't safe. They don't ask for barricades. They block off with their vehicles. They shoot off the fireworks and they don't clean it up. I have a neighbor who did that last year, and I took pictures and posted on Facebook, and then they got shamed into cleaning it up. However, you have somebody here who had the wherewithal to come to you, ask for those barricades, ask for the safety, has the permission of the 3 homes that it will actually impact the most for the sake of their area. And they're willing to actually go on record and say they're going to clean up. I think that's a huge step forward. A lot of block parties now occur. A lot of random blockades are put in. And as long as nobody complains, the police are not aware of it, and neither are you and neither am I. But when I drive around and I see it, I don't take issue with it. You've got little kids and adults and everyone else running around in the street shooting off the fireworks. More often than not, they're not cleaned up. And he is on record as saying he's going to get insured. He's going to make sure the barricades are in place and then taken down, and he's going to clean up. I think this would be a good thing for our community. We've had a rather diverse community. People move in and move out of the neighborhoods and they don't get to know their neighbor. Perhaps maybe moving forward, you can get together and develop a policy that would be conducive to all of you that you could agree on. It would benefit the community and it could also benefit your neighborhoods. But thank you for those who voiced their support of this. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, comments from council. Councilman Vaughn.
I just had one question for legal about your reservation on this. Was it about the insurance? Was it about the lack of process?
Process is one. The other issue is just this language in the agreement itself. There's numerous amendments that I'd like to make to it, so.
If we could make those amendments, would you be in support or at least?
You're still stuck with the policy issue with, there's no application process and it's basically, how are you going to deny any of these requests is the issue. Discriminatory practice would be a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Yerger.
In light of the discussion that we've been having, and I don't want to prejudge how council may vote yea or nay on this item, but in order to get some further clarity to the resolution, I would at least like to see 2 additional whereas statements added to the resolution before we vote. The first one would be this: whereas approval is contingent upon Nelson Lanes being open and cleared of any barriers and trash by 12 p.m. The second would be whereas any discharge of fireworks will be made from private property and will be finished by 11 p.m. in accordance with Fremont Municipal Code Section 7301. I would offer those as amendments to Resolution 2022-104 before vote.
Councilman Ellis.
I got a question for legal. Is that a motion that we have to work on?
I think
Is that an official motion? Okay. I believe there is an application process. The gentleman came and spoke, he filled out information, filled out the application, essentially what we have in front of us. So there was an application process in place. The application is the same one that's used by nonprofits, so I can see a little bit of difference there. But in the resolution, it states he will get insurance to cover any liabilities that the city may have against it. So I'm thinking like the citizen said, we're better off here with this gentleman than we are with all the other people that are going to block traffic, that are going to set off fireworks on the streets with no liability to this. So I would think that this is the ultimate situation for us to be approving and going forward, creating a process in place so that we can get more individuals using the process as opposed to not.
Certainly, and as far as a worst case scenario on both sides, you're right, having a policy in place would be best. One, I doubt there's going to be the ability to get insurance from a single property owner to block off a private street. And if there is, there's going to be many contingencies that are considered non-covered events, such as someone driving down the street where it wasn't properly barricaded. The city would be liable for that. There's no insurance company that would cover that. Those are just the issues I'm seeing. And the application process that we have does not discuss this specific instance of applying to close down a residential street for a block party. We don't have that process, and I think we should have one. And I like the amendment proposed by Councilmember Yerger. Of course, I would add all the whereas statement language to the now therefore be it resolved language as well. So it basically repeat itself, But the only enforceable part of the resolutions really is the actual be it resolved statement.
Any other comments from council on this item? Okay, so there's a motion to add the whereas statements and then include those in the now, unless Councilman Yerger agrees with that, concurs with that. Okay. Okay, so so I guess I'd take a second in regards to those. Councilman Vaughn.
I will second as amended.
Okay. Cast your votes to amend whereas statement.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay. We have an amended resolution, so. Councilman Vaughn.
Motion to approve as amended.
Okay. Is there a second? Councilman Ellis.
I second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-2.
Item 11, ordinance 5621, amending section 6-432 penalties of the Fremont Municipal Code. This is a staff request to move to final reading.
Thank you, Mayor. Even though I think Jody did the staff report, this was really my item and it correlates with an item later in the agenda to make a master fee schedule for the city. This section that we're trying to amend, it has some language in there that we didn't want to be interpreted to apply to misdemeanors that are in chapter 6. It's couched under the section for graffiti. So I think it was intended to only apply to infractions involving graffiti. But the way it was written says in this division, and that could be interpreted to mean anywhere under chapter 6. So the issue was there's minimums of a fine that apply to this specific infraction. So we wanted to make sure that when prosecuting these ordinance violations, that the prosecuting attorney and the police department wasn't hindered by a minimum amount that is unworkable for the resolution process prior to getting to court and unworkable for a plea agreement once you get into court. So this was an attempt to get rid of those minimums. I've spoken with Councilmember Yerger, who had some concerns about this item. And what I would request is that we hold a first reading on it. And then what I'll have 2 amendments to come back with. One is to either only have this penalty section apply to graffiti, which would keep the mandatory minimums in there. Or the other option is to keep it as is, eliminating the minimums and adding graffiti to the master fee schedule, which it's not in there currently. So those are the issues with this ordinance. And I've spoken with staff and the chief, and this isn't urgent enough to necessitate changing it tonight. And I'm willing to answer any questions. That was a lot to go over, but that was the intent, was to make sure that we're having a smooth enforcement process of misdemeanor violations.
Thank you, legal. Any questions? Councilman Yerger.
So council, I appreciated the opportunity to discuss this with you ahead of time and added a lot of clarity. So I thank you for that. I certainly understand, I think, the clarification you want to make with regards to let's don't use the word division, let's use chapter. Certainly makes a lot of sense, ties this directly to how we label our municipal code. But one of the questions that lingered from the discussion that we had was whether or not, if in this section we intend to eliminate the penalties, the 150 and the 250, and maybe those would just automatically move to the fee schedule if they weren't in here. I don't know if there's a thought that you would change the values of these, but they would be stricken out of this code if we proceed the way we're doing. And part of my discussion with you is, well, this isn't the only section in police regulations where we are assigning a fine. there are several other sections in section 6, police regulations, where we are defining the fines.
Right, the reference.
And we don't plan to change those and put those in the fee schedule.
So the ones that reference the master fee schedule, those were included in the fee schedule right now, those fines amounts. But there isn't any other area of chapter 6 that places an enumerated amount for a fine other than the penalty section at the end that applies to general misdemeanors for up to $1,000 fine.
Oh, well, I had a list of those someplace. I'm trying to look at those. Oh, it looks like section 6.423 has a $500 to $1,000 fine. 624 has a $100 fine. 628 has a $100 fine. And we're not changing those, whether they're duplicated in the master fee schedule or not. So if we're going to take fines out of 6.432, shouldn't we take those out as well and move them all into the fee schedule?
You said 6.428.
I think it's, if I have these noted correctly, it was 6.423, 6.424, and 6.428.
Yeah, so the lottery prohibitions, that's something that should stay in there, we believe, at least from my perspective. And tobacco is another issue. These are more for the prosecuting fines such as violations of that the civil service officers are responding to, and generally other fines. Those sections you're pointing to are extra, we believe are extra.
They wouldn't be ticketed by CSOs or law enforcement. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, they would. That does require a specific application, harboring illegal aliens. Those are a different level of prosecution than dog at large or any of those other misdemeanor fines.
Okay, well, I just wanted to raise that issue because I certainly understand trying to put as much in the fee schedule as we can, make the life easier. I am concerned, I guess, to make sure that what we do put in the fee schedule is commensurate with the offense. And for example, suggesting that we would lower perhaps the graffiti penalties in moving it into the fee schedule, I'm not sure I would be in agreement with that. I think we don't want graffiti, and making that a $25 fine, for example, wouldn't be acceptable. So, we need to be cognizant of what we're doing when we put these in the fee schedule in lieu of in the code. But other than that, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to not push this into immediate ordinance, and that we can take some action in the next reading, commitment to make those changes for second reading, because we've had some difficulty in getting that accomplished. So we will get it accomplished this time, correct? Second reading. We've committed to making second reading changes and haven't done them recently, and I'm just concerned that we get these done if we're gonna put this, not gonna make the changes tonight. At first reading, we're gonna make them at second reading, then we need to get them done at second reading.
Yes, I'm telling you, I will have changes for you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, questions for staff? Any comments from the public on this item? Okay, seeing none. Any additional comments from council? If there are none, I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance 5621. Councilman Legband.
If there's no other comments, I'd make the motion to hold first reading of ordinance 5621.
Councilman Sukram.
I will second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We'll now have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending chapter 6, article 4 of the Fremont Municipal Code, repealing all the ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect on first reading.
Okay, moving on to item 12. This is resolution 2022-105 to approve the master fee schedule for the city of Fremont and to authorize staff to assess those fees accordingly. We'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Jody Sanders, City Administrator. You have before you the schedule for the master fee schedule. I've presented it so that you had an opportunity to look at it. We have the amounts that we've either changed deleted or added are in red from what you're looking at. And of course, we potentially would have some additional coming in for graffiti. Members of staff in their own areas, in large part, consulted other communities to find out what their fees were, looked at what the costs are to provide some of these services. I know the utilities with Jeff Shanahan, they went through kind of an extensive process to make sure that in some instances, we are still not collecting the full amount, but to try and move toward the full amount rather than just give sticker shock and have a great big increase all at once. You'll also notice that in sections on the utilities, in the utility section, there are parts that will say the costs, market costs at that time, because we might have a hydrant on the shelf, for example. That hydrant we might have had on the shelf and paid, I'm making this up, but it would be like we'd pay $100 for that hydrant. To replace that hydrant with a new one now with the supply chain issues that we're having could be 200, 250, whatever. So the cost that we're looking at there is the cost to replace or to obtain a new one for the customer. Were there questions or concerns about what we have? Obviously, we wanted to continue this, but to give you an opportunity to take a look at it. But we'd welcome any feedback you might have.
Councilman Yerger.
So I have a couple of observations I wanted to run by you, and I'm glad Chief Elliott hasn't left because some of these might go to him. But one of the things that I think is potentially missing here, we had some discussion earlier in our agenda several meetings ago with regards to tree removal and tree removal permits, which is in code. We have a requirement for you to have a permit to remove more than 5 trees. I don't see that we have a cost of a permit to do that work. And so if I missed it, you can let me know, but I didn't see one. And if you are found guilty of doing more than 5 trees removal without a permit, I don't see anything that penalizes you for having done that, should the city cite you for a violation. So I would draw that to your attention as a possibility for, should that be included. And then when we get over to parking, it says parking, there's a time limit violation, parking violation, improper parking over 18 hours residential, parked in a business district, parking violation, owner responsibility. I'm not sure what that is. Parking violation, chief of police powers. I'm wondering if you could elaborate what those are intended to differentiate. And in light of what we just did for downtown business district parking, I don't understand the parked in the business district as being definitive or applicable, because the only 2 things we left as finable down there in the business district is during the business hour 2-hour parking limit and the 72-hour parking in the parking lots. Otherwise, the citizens of Fremont are free to park down there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, except with those restrictions. So I don't know what business district means. And maybe you could explain the differences between all those as the people would enforce those.
We've been working on this for a while, so I suspect that was in there prior to you guys changing the law here a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
The issue with what we did was we took all of those fines from state schedule and took each one of them, went through it and tried to evaluate that based on what other communities were doing as far as the fines concerned. It had been in there before and it is in there now. It doesn't necessarily, if there's not a law that it's applicable to, then it doesn't mean anything.
Well, I know that we have city code that doesn't address the business district. For example, parking lots that the city owns, city-owned parking lots that are not in the business district, overnight parking is still prohibited. So one of these, I assume, gets that, which is, I suppose, parking violation, I guess.
There should be an ordinance number attached to that. And I'd have to look the ordinance number up to tell you exactly what that is. Because that's just a general description of that, whatever that ordinance is. But there should be an ordinance on the list that you guys have. Is there an ordinance number listed next to it?
No.
Okay, well, on the list that I have, there is. So there should be an ordinance number listed next to each one of those. So parking in a business district or anything would correspond to a specific city ordinance. And that number would be on the waiver schedule that we use at the police department.
For example, business district could mean alleys.
Yeah.
And we certainly didn't change and allow anybody to park in alleys.
Whatever that ordinance is what it would apply to.
And so if that specificity had been given us, then maybe I wouldn't have had those questions. I just looked at those half a dozen items, they're all parking related and going like, well, what's the real difference? If you pick to write these up, what's the difference?
No, each one of those, each one of those
Has an ordinance.
applies to a specific ordinance. So I just out of the top, disorderly conduct's in there. Disorderly conduct applies to city ordinance 6414. I know this one very well. So that will tell you specifically what the law is. So if you are paying a ticket for disorderly conduct, it's 6414, and it'll tell you exactly what you did.
I'm assuming that when we do the fee schedule informal, we're not going to have the ordinance references in the document. Is that correct? Law enforcement will know what they are, but we're not going to publish it that way. Is that correct?
We could add that column for the police. We have identified those.
I just think it would be helpful if anyone wanted to look that up, not just the police force, but I guess if the citizenry wanted to look at what the fines were and at what code they're violating, they would be able to look it up. So it might be useful if it doesn't take a lot of extra effort and paperwork if you already have it. I just encourage you to take a look at the parking descriptions and make sure that, in fact, they're definitive enough so that we know the differential. I understood the 18-hour residential, but what is owner responsible? What does that mean?
Owner responsible has to apply to basically to vehicles that are parked on city streets that are in violation of ordinances. Owner responsible, if I remember the ordinance, that gave us the authority to remove the vehicle from a public street. So it was a secondary violation. So if you parked a vehicle on a city street that was in violation of, say, the 18-hour ordinance, then we generally issued you a citation for violation of 18-hour and for being the owner responsible of that parked vehicle.
I thought maybe it could also include like parking left side of street,
Yeah,
facing the wrong direction, parking on the right-of-way median, blocking the sidewalk. All of those would be owner responsible, I assume, but
Exactly.
I don't want to guess.
That ordinance, the way I remember it, that ordinance allows us to hold the owner of the vehicle responsible for it versus the driver of the vehicle or somebody who had just borrowed the vehicle.
Okay. Well, I'd ask staff to take a look at the first one that I mentioned about the city code dealing with tree removal as being something in the fee schedule twice over the permit and the penalty. And then if we have capability of putting in the citations, that might be helpful. So just consider whether you want to do that or not. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Councilman Vaughn?
I did have one question for Jody. I noticed on here, not new, but the garden plot, that there is a fee for that, and that was new on me. Took me a bit by surprise. Maybe I'm not interpreting that correctly.
That would be in the parks area. That would just be the fee that we charge for someone to rent a garden plot. The community garden is out just south of the airport.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, I'll take comments from the public on the master fee schedule. Seeing no comments, any additional comments from council? Okay, Councilman Legband.
If there are no other comments, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2022-105. Now, is this for first reading or is this?
This gets it done.
What do you want, Jody?
We would want to continue it to the next meeting.
So we just want to continue this. So
I mean, we need to because. Whichever you'd like to do.
well, then I'm going to just continue this. I'll make a motion to continue resolution 22-105.
Councilwoman Ganem,
Second.
cast your votes.
The motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 13, resolution 2022-106, interlocal agreement with Dodge County and the Lower Platte NRD for a flood reduction assessment. We'll have staff report.
Good evening, Jody Sanders, Director, or I'm sorry, City Administrator. I'm still working on that, guys. You have before you an interlocal agreement between Platte Township, Fremont, and Dodge County. This is kind of the result of one of the, or many of the Joint Water Management Advisory Board actions where they're looking at, where can we look at some flood mitigation opportunities all around the community. This one in particular is looking at the southwest corner or portion of Fremont that goes out into Dodge County and the NRD. There are other political subdivisions that will be participating in the conversation. Obviously, Inglewood. We're trying to, there's another agency down in that area that would also be at the meetings and the handle, participating in discussions, but not participating financially. The Dodge County applied for the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC assistance. That the amount is up to $250,000. This agreement would obligate the city to pay a portion of the 25% of the local match that's required. So the city of Fremont, if this were agreed upon, the city of Fremont would pay $20,000 of the estimated $62,500. This is the maximum because the grant only is up to $250,000. So these are the most that we would be paying, and this is to continue the engineering work and doing some feasibility studies down in the area, Platte Township and the western edge of Fremont. Basically looking for some opportunities to mitigate the flood risk that we have there. We're involved in a number of these groups where we're meeting with all of these agencies as a group to look at drainage issues all around the community. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Okay. Any questions? Councilman Yerger.
I just wanted to clear up something. Jody, you said that it's roughly $20,000 for the city. I guess I wanted to make sure my understanding of the statement that says 25% of the 62,500 was the ceiling. I think that amount would be less than 20,000.
Excuse me. The percentage of the local match is 25%.
Okay.
Of the 250. The city's portion is 8% of the grand total of 250,000.
Okay, so the exact number it isn't 62.5. The exact number would be how much?
For the city of Fremont is 20,000.
Even?
Yes. That's the maximum that we would be required to pay for this study.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That modifies something that I wanted to suggest here. So in 2019, in resolution 2019-025, we basically had a very similar interlocal agreement with the county and the NRD with regards to doing hazard mitigation flood plan analysis. Kind of very similar kind of a thing as we're doing here. And that came in the form of resolution. And in light of conversations that we've had, I'd like the following document entered into the record.
Okay, is there a second? Councilwoman Ganem. Okay, cast your votes to receive.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
What I've done, Jody, is to encapsulate what is inherent in what we're doing here in resolution form, much like we did in 2019. But the document that I just handed out would need to have the amount listed in the now be it therefore statement changed from $15,625 to $20,000 based on what you just said earlier. Just a request that we use resolutions to ascribe what we're actually doing and what we're paying for, as we've said that we would do in the past. And this certainly has the way we were handling it back in 2019 when this very similar kind of thing came up. So hopefully the staff would agree that this is the appropriate language for a resolution. It comes right out of your agreement, essentially. Just puts it in resolution form, and it identifies specifically the $20,000 then that the city is liable for, which we haven't disclosed anywhere.
There was a resolution included in page 153, but this would be an alternative to that. Of the packet.
Well, there is a packet document, the interlocal contract agreement, and all of that document has the whereas statements, but that is the agreement itself. And nowhere in there does it really specify that we're paying $20,000, which is why I transcribed that whereas statements into a resolution form and identified exactly what the council is going to be approving, which
there's a resolution, page 153 for this in the packet.
The 20,000.
oh, my apologies then. So it's already there. We just really need to add what is in my recommendation for the final amount at $20,000. My mistake.
So we're amending the resolution to, in
In
the
the-
now therefore be it resolved to add the $20,000 max.
Yes. Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. Take a motion, a second to amend. Councilman Legban.
I will second that.
Okay, cast your votes to amend.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
I take a motion to approve the resolution as amended. Councilman Yerger.
Motion to approve resolution 2022-106 as amended.
Councilman Jensen.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Item 14, resolution 2022-107, authorizing mayor to sign the consent agreement final order with the Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a settlement agreement and final order that has been reached with the EPA. After many discussions, this follows their audit back in 2020 where they alleged certain violations. The agreement lays out what their allegations are. The city does not. The city reserves its ability to deny these allegations if for some reason it needed to. And what we've reached here is the lowest amount on, EPA has a fee schedule that they have to follow. Federal government has a lot of different lanes in which the city could fall under, but based upon our population and based upon the allegations. At the level we fell at after negotiating with the EPA, we've hit the lowest amount possible that the federal government can assess. So I think I would consider that a win for the city. If there are any questions about the agreement itself, I'll take some of those. What I would caution is that this is ongoing matter that although this penalty phase has been resolved, there are still things that the city must do to become into compliance with our MS4 program where they allege that we violated. So we just want to reserve statements that are extraneous to the settlement agreement for executive session. So I'll take any questions about the agreement if there are any about the language in it.
Okay, Councilman Yerger.
Well, I have 4 questions, so I'm not sure whether or not they are the ones that you would say you can answer or you can't answer here. We would have to go. So do you want me to just tell you what my questions are and you can make a judgment call? I mean, because I don't know how else to get my questions out.
Yeah, as long as you're not making affirmative statements. in the
I'm
question.
not, these are questions.
Right. Go for it.
What internal actions by the administration have been identified as being needed and are being implemented to ensure no repeat of the EPA's 4 counts charged and being settled?
That one, executive session.
How often will the EPA follow up on compliance?
That is in the, that would be executive session.
If found to be in non-compliance in the future for the same issues, what's the ramification?
They can increase the penalty or assess another penalty.
Per the agreement to post publicly, when and how will the public get the opportunity to speak?
Oh, you mean for the EPA's comment?
In here, it says we have to provide public notice or whatever, and the
No.
public will have an opportunity based on that public notice to do whatever.
So-
My question is, when does the public get an opportunity to deal
Right.
with that statement?
So that is referring to the EPA's process. So if the council approves entering into this agreement, it'll go back to the EPA, and as an administrative agency of the federal government, they have to have a notice and comment period before they approve orders. So to be honest with you, I'm not sure how you would provide a comment. I think there's an online link at the EPA website you could find. But there would be, the comments would be to the EPA.
Okay, so in order to get answers to those first two, we need to go to executive session.
And if the council wants to, that's not, and that's great. And if not, I can follow up with you after the meeting.
I guess then I would make a motion to go to executive session so we could discuss those questions.
I'll just couch this as pending or threatened litigation.
Okay.
Councilman Jensen. Okay.
I move to go into executive session for the purpose of discussion of potential litigation and for the furtherance reason that executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest.
Okay, is there a second? Councilwoman Ganem. Motion has been made and seconded to go into executive session for the purpose of potential and threatened litigation and for the further reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Is there any discussion? Okay. Councilman Yerger, you're on. Do you have discussion? Councilman Vaughn?
I believe legal said that he would be more than happy to follow up after the meeting. So I'm not sure why executive session is really necessary here. I'm going to vote no.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, the pending motion is to go into executive session for the purpose of potential and threatened litigation or for the further reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Cast your vote.
The motion fails 4-3.
Okay, we're back on the item. Were any questions for staff? Councilman Jensen?
I'm going to assume this, the amount of this fine, trying to fight them anymore would end up costing us a lot more than that.
Yeah, and you're playing by their rules at the first stage, so any chance we would really have is on appeal.
Okay. Any other comments? Comments from the public?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont. You were all presented a drainage criteria manual that was presented by our city engineer, Dave Godikin. And it had some interesting information, and there had been push over the years to adopt MS4 issues and permitting, et cetera, that somehow I'd like to know and I'm sure others in the public would like to know how this was allowed to happen, how we did not have a handle on this when we knew darn well what was required, and how the city got themselves caught up in this. This is 2019 and 2020, according to what was in here. I'd like to know from my notes that I had taken in reviewing this, what is being put in place to prevent this from reoccurrence this year, this fall, next spring? I'd like to have an answer to that. And how is the EPA going to monitor this, and what actions have been taken to be proactive and be preventative, and from this occurring for us being assessed fines yet again? We have a lot of construction going on in the city. There should have been requirements and handle of this already, and we knew full well what the criteria was required by the EPA. I'd like some answers on how this is allowed to happen, how the city is going to prevent it from happening again, and what the criteria is that's going to be adhered to prevent it. Because right now, all we have is this manual that was presented and hasn't been adopted, and are those practices, those best practices been put in place? Thank you.
Open it up to council. Councilman, you're.
Based on the comments that we just heard, I'd like to ask legal how we manage to make information available to the public about this topic and why we're spending the $26,000 in settlement, which I agree is a good settlement, I guess, relative to the findings. So it's minimal with regards to what we could have perhaps faced. But at the same token, we're spending taxpayer money here for something that we shouldn't necessarily have had to do if we had remained in compliance. So I think the request to know how did we get where we are and how do we get out of there is something that the public can and should understand. And how do we communicate that to the public if we can't even have an executive session to discuss this ourselves? How do we possibly communicate that to the public? Because essentially some of those questions were which is what I was asking to get to the bottom of in an executive session. So how do we do what was just asked?
Right, and I would just reiterate that discussions in the executive session are not public information, but the audit information is public knowledge. The EPA has published their findings. So that information is out there. And there is, the city has agreed to without getting into negotiations with the EPA or our position as far as their allegations are concerned, we are required to report every 6 months about concerning the allegations that are raised. There's 4 specific allegations, as you can see in the order. Every 6 months, we have to give them our progress updates, and we have to meet sufficient progress for each one of those reports in order to remain in compliance with the agreement we entered into with the EPA as far as the violations in the audit were concerned. That didn't involve a penalty. That was just how we coming to compliance.
And are all those reports and documents available to the general public upon filing?
The report, yes, anything the city sends to the EPA are publicly available.
So, but only through document discovery, we're not posting it up so that people would be informed on this issue.
Yeah, that would probably be, you go to the EPA or you can file public records requests. I mean, yeah, if you want to come go through.
I'm just asking for the public who said, how are we ever going to know? And the answer is, if you want to know on this issue, you'll have to issue a public records request.
For as voluminous as everything is, yes, it would be a nightmare we'd have to have our own website for it.
Well, in particular, what the city is doing relative to mitigating this going forward. If your request was limited to that, I assume that wouldn't be a horrendous portion of necessarily the filing.
No, right. That settlement agreement regarding compliance is a public document.
And that includes the remedies that have been offered by the city that will be monitored going forward. That's part of that document.
That includes the requirements that the EPA has imposed upon the city.
Like an audit finding, like we would have in finance, where they find there's something wrong with your books or whatever, and you have to respond. Those kind of responses to the EPA's findings are available now on the public record.
All the responses that have been sent to the EPA are public record, yes.
Okay, it can be found on their website or would still have to be discovered through document discovery?
If you did EPA requests for documents, they'd probably require a Freedom of Information Act request, which is the federal version of our public record request.
In essence, nobody posts this up on their website for anybody to review and just pick off. You have to send in a request.
Yeah, I would doubt, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Comments from council. Councilwoman Ganem.
No excuses, but I've noticed the years that we were not in compliance happened to be during the year of the flooding. And that changed a lot of lives and a lot of scheduling and job requirements, as well as did the pandemic. The important thing is that we don't repeat and that we have processes and procedures in place so it doesn't happen again.
Councilman Jensen.
If there's no further comment, I just move to approve resolution 2022-0107.
Councilman Vaughn.
I will second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Take a motion to adjourn. Councilman Vaughn.
So moved.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.